Everything working okay so far?
So far, so good. Looks good.
You know what was really weird? I had you on mute and I left to get something, and then all of a sudden, Cody, I heard you speaking, even though it was on mute.
Weird. I mean, I did just speak a few minutes ago, but
Yeah. And I'm like, how did that happen? And I came back and it was on mute, but I somehow came through. Very strange. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Governor's Task Force on Student Debt meeting. We are about 5 minutes out and we will get started at that point in time. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We're a couple minutes out from starting our meeting on the Governor's Task Force on Student Debt. So as participants are joining, please just settle in and we'll get started shortly.
Hi, this is Connie. Am I connected?
Yes, you are, Connie. We hear you loud and clear.
Oh, good.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is now 10 o'clock and most task force members I've been able to see are logged in, and we'll take a roll call shortly. But welcome to the Governor's Task Force on Student Debt. And I think the chair, Secretary Blumenfeld, will begin our meeting.
Great, thank you, Michelle, and welcome back to meeting 2. First and foremost, I hope that you and all of your loved ones are doing well during these challenging times. I'd like to introduce 2 new members to our task force, Shannon Conlin, Assistant Attorney General at the Wisconsin Department of Justice. And I mentioned last week Casey Wachniak, who's school administration consultant with the Education Approval Program, which is part of the Department of Safety and Professional Services. We have an action-packed agenda today. We will again hear from leading experts as well as firsthand stories from borrowers. We will also be joined by Governor Evers to welcome and thank all of you for sharing your time and your talents with us. And Michelle, our wonderful facilitator, will be sharing the process that we will take to get from here to completion. As I set the table for the weeks to come, I want us all to think about what success will look like when our meetings conclude. To me, success looks like the following 5 points. First, that we look at the student debt issue from many angles. I believe we have already taken the first steps to accomplish this by bringing together this broad, diverse group of individuals to serve on this task force. Second, that we hear every member's perspective. While we are sharing a great deal of information in the first 2 meetings, we will have more time for discussion in our 3rd meeting, which is coming up just next week. We will also be asking for input and feedback following this meeting today. Third, that we consider and create solutions outlined in the Governor's executive order. For the sake of time, I won't list them now, but rest assured we are tracking them. Fourth, that we outline in a report how the state can best address the student debt crisis for Wisconsin. And last but not least, that we create a holistic body of knowledge for Governor Evers and others to consider and create strategies to improve students' debt situation for all Wisconsinites. We will check in periodically on these success factors to ensure that we are on track. With that, I will pass the ball over to Michelle.
Thank you, Secretary. As mentioned, we have an action-packed agenda today in just our 3 hours that we will be sharing together. And so we will start with our roll call. And we're going to try proceeding with this a little differently this week than 2 weeks ago to reserve our time for our presenters and our visit with the governor. So as you can see, the roll call list is before your screen, and it's in order of the executive order announcement. I'll be calling off the names, and I just ask that you respond using the chat function that you are here. If you are on a phone line and not connected via computer, please just indicate here. But if you are participating by computer, if you could just respond via chat that you are here, would appreciate it. And we'll see how this works this week. So, and we begin with the roll call with our Secretary Kathy Blumenfeld, who just did our welcome remarks. So thank you. And then Derek Campbell and Connie Hutchinson. I know Connie did a voice check a few minutes ago, so we'll use that chat feature if we can, and that's the bubble at the bottom with the buttons. I believe it may be the 4th or 5th bubble from the left. It looks like a cartoon bubble. And so we have Laura Sutherland. Right. And then Kiona Jones.
Good morning, here.
Thank you. Larry Graves. Jeff Barant, sorry. And Brandon Trujillo. And Rebecca Larson. Representative Ballwig.
She chatted here,
Okay, great.
just to me privately.
Perfect. Thank you. Representative Hesselbein. And Senator Smith. So Senator Smith and then Shannon Holsley. Shannon Holsley. Okay, Masood Akhtar. Thank you. Alfred Kimani. And Karen Bauer. And Jody Chung. And Lucy Fensel. Lucy Fensel, I saw you in the participant list, so finding chat. Renee Gash. Great. And Austin Hammond. And Marisha Harris. Renee Howard Hayes. And let's see, Hildy Eisen. Derek Kindle. Oh, thank you, Shane. Shane Maloney is filling in for Derek. Paul Kundert. Thank you. Kevin McShane. Thank you. And Jamie Miller. Michael Madursky. And Michael Rosen. And Alexandra Shade. Thank you. And Casey Wachniak. Thank you, everyone, for your participation and cooperation and getting through that. And if I've mispronounced, I do apologize. We'll get there. So the process, one of the things we wanted to discuss at this week's meeting and make sure everyone had a clear view, as I know this came up in questions at the last meeting, in regards to how will we get to some of the conclusions and recommendations. Well, the first item has been completed, and this is the formation of the advisory task force, defining the problem and why it is important. This was done through the executive order by the governor's office. Next, we need to collect information, and this is going to happen through meeting 1 through 5. We're just at the initial stages of this. We need to learn more about the problem from our researchers, our experts, and other leaders in this area and field. We'll gather and analyze the data. I know there were a number of questions that were data related. It was also a shared goal and a stakeholder item when asked by the task force members. We need to hear from student debt holders. We need to hear from those borrowers who have experienced this debt and dealing with it, who are currently experiencing this debt and processing and getting through this. And then there'll be self-study. You'll be asked to read additional materials that are sent out in your e-binders and ask questions. That's part of the self-study, to be engaged during the meetings and be sure that we're asking questions. In relation to the questions we're unable to get to due to time or the constraints of our virtual meeting world, please continue to ask those through the chat function that we will be using. So I can facilitate those questions. Ask those through the email, the Student Debt Task Force at dfi.wisconsin.gov. So these questions can be answered post-meeting through the eBinder and distributed as well. We'll be asking our presenters to follow up in answering those questions. Then we need to brainstorm and analyze new ideas. This is an ongoing process, this brainstorming. So meetings 1 through 5 will be full of this. Some of it will be formally facilitated. Starting with our next meeting, we'll have time to have some activity sessions in our agenda, but this is an ongoing thing where we will be collecting possible recommendations from presenters as part of their slides and presentations, and from our task force members. You are members we need to hear from. We need to know what ideas you are having. Don't save them for the activities. Again, please submit those to the Student Debt Task Force at dfi.wisconsin.gov. Submit them as part of the chat function as well, and we will be keeping tabs on that, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. We'll then group possibilities into themes so we can see the large areas that we have, and then we'll prepare white papers on those themes for review. So there can be a little bit more concentrated study on what those themes and possible recommendations are. Then we'll develop these possible solutions. We'll take a deeper dive to develop the recommendations and initiatives, and then comes the prioritizations. We need to prioritize these initiatives to identify top recommendations. It was asked if we'd be using voting. We'll be using all sorts of facilitated tools with this group as it relates to polling, prioritizations through, you may have been part of sticky note processes so we can see where the group's focus is. But we'll also be looking for all opinions and information as part of this process. Improve and finalize our solutions. As part of meeting 6 and 7, where we are developing these recommendations, we're going to gather feedback. We're going to explore all viewpoints expressed during these interactive discussions and group activities. It's going to be really important to understand all of these viewpoints so we're creating the best recommendations possible. And then it's time for the report, submitting that report. We'll prepare a final report summarizing top recommendations, include all identified recommendations in the report. We won't exclude information. All information will be included, but we're going to spend the largest effort summarizing those top recommendations that come out during those prioritization sessions and activities. So we want to be sure that we are spending our time based on what those polling efforts are showing us. But we have lots of content to cover and learning because we're just all at this baseline at this point in time. So next, it's going to be really important. I wanted to revisit our meeting ground rules slide. This is related to our respectful communication, active listening, attendance and participation, that minimizing to no multitasking, and then creativity and open-mindedness. So critical during this process, especially when we get into that activities and brainstorming aspects, and then that preparation and pre-work. So we all have that baseline and can move forward and be prepared for these discussions. So just wanted to make sure that we revisit that commitment to these meetings in this task force. Tracking potential solutions. How are we going to get there? There's going to be a ton of information flow that will be happening meetings 1 through 5, and then we're going to have to decipher and boil all that down in meetings 6 and 7. So what we will be doing behind the scenes during these first 3 meetings that we will be sharing with you as a task force is keeping a list of recommendations and ideas that have been brought forward by our speakers, our presenters, you as our task force members, the items that we are getting at the Student Debt Task Force email address. And we're going to share this at future meetings, but we'll be tracking these ideas and potential solutions. This is, again, where our white papers will come from. But it will be in an Excel spreadsheet, and we'll be able to easily sort through this information. And again, we'll be sharing that with you. And the first version of it will have the information that we boiled down from meetings 1 and 2. So again, as you are thinking of ideas from the information you're receiving from these presenters, that and the borrowers that we're hearing from, if you're identifying possible solutions from the information and experiences that our borrowers are sharing with us, please be sure to submit that, jot it down, and so we can be moving forward in that problem solving piece of our ideas. So next I'm going to hand it over to our chair and moving forward. And again, I just want to remind everyone that today for our questions, we will be using the chat function. And if you are on the phone, please use the Student Debt Task Force at dfi.wisconsin.gov to submit your question. And the people monitoring that, Cheryl and Marco, will be sure to get those questions submitted so we can ask them of our presenters.
Oh, is it turned over to me?
No, Secretary
Thank
Blumenfeld,
you.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
I have the distinct honor of introducing Dr. Connie Hutchinson, who is the Executive Director of the Higher Education AIDS Board. Dr. Hutchinson received her PhD from the University of Wisconsin School of Education, Leadership and Policy Analysis. She attended UW-Eau Claire and Grambling State University for her undergraduate degree. Executive Secretary Hutchinson has worked as an elementary school teacher and principal, and in 2003, she was appointed by Governor Doyle to the position of Executive Secretary of the Higher Education AIDS Board, or HEAB. She was again appointed to the position in 2019 by Governor Evers. Connie has consulted with education groups around the country, including Wisconsin, Idaho, Florida, Mississippi, and Arkansas. And she's been a huge help with getting this task force launched. So welcome, Executive Secretary Connie Hutchinson.
Thank you, Secretary Blumenfeld, for giving me the opportunity to address this important group. As she said, I am the Executive Secretary of the Higher Educational AIDS Board. The Higher Educational AIDS Board is a part-time independent policy-making board, and we are composed of 12 members that are appointed by the governor. The members of the board are nominated by the University of Wisconsin system, the Wisconsin Technical College system, and the Wisconsin Association of Independent Colleges and Universities. We also have an ex officio member that represents the 2 tribal colleges in Wisconsin, the College of Menominee Nation and the Lecoutre-Ojibwa Community College. The reason that they are not official members of the board, I believe, is because the Higher Educational AIDS Board was formed before the 2 tribal colleges were created and opened. And we are actually working to see if we can get legislation passed when we are all back in our offices and can communicate more efficiently with each other to see if we can get an official representative from the tribal colleges on our board. The board includes a member from UW Board of Regents, from the Wisconsin Technical College Board, and a trustee from an independent college or university. And again, these are all nominated by those individual sectors. So that's what we actually have 4 sectors: UW system, the technical college system, the tribal colleges, and the Wisconsin Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, or WACU. The board also includes a student and a financial aid director from each of these sectors, and 1 citizen member to represent the general public, and then the state superintendent of public instruction, or designee. Some examples of issues that the board has that we discuss and take action on include recommendations for statutory and administrative code changes. So we have some of our programs that have to have not only statutory authority, but also that we have to write rules for. They also changes to the Wisconsin Higher Education Grant or Wisconsin grant formulas, and I'll explain that a little bit later in the presentation. And then also for our biennial budget proposal. The Higher Educational Aids Board is also a very small agency, and we administer financial aid for the college students in Wisconsin. We have a staff of 10 full-time and 1 half-time employees, and that includes me. And I just want to say that our staff is absolutely excellent. They do a tremendous amount of work, and they really care about the students that they serve. I also want to mention specifically Sherry Nelson, the policy advisor for the Higher Educational Aids Board. She is the total information bank of everything HEAB, and I actually worked with her when I did this job for Governor Doyle. She knows everything, and she is my go-to person that I ask about anything that I have questions about. I think she's attending this as an observer, just in case I have a question I can't answer, maybe I can let her answer that. We work very closely with the Wisconsin's, with WACU, the University of Wisconsin Technical College System, and the 2 tribal colleges and the tech colleges. We work most closely with the financial aid staff in each of those institutions that are represented by their sectors. And just let me say, Kimani and Kevin McShane, the president and past president of the Wisconsin Association of Financial Aid Administrators, are members of this task force. And I just cannot tell you how much work their financial aid administrators in their own institutions. Kimani is at Madison College, and Kevin McShane is at Herzing University. And they do represent the most wonderful group of people I have ever worked with. The college and university and financial aid administrators care deeply about their students. They do the heavy lift. They are the ones that have to tell students they are not getting aid, they are getting aid, they have to pay back loans, they don't have to pay back loans. And I've been on calls with each of the different sectors during this COVID crisis, and they are still continuing to work with their students to talk to them about how they can get through this and still get their education. So I feel very privileged to work with this group of people. Our largest program that we administer is the Wisconsin Grant, which is essentially the Pell Grant for Wisconsin. I mean, it's not the Pell Grant, but it's very similar to that. And the appropriations for this grant are very specific to each sector. So when our budget comes out, there's an amount of money that goes to WACU, that goes to Tech, that goes to UW, and that goes to the tribal colleges. The amount is appropriated during the biennial budget. Prior to submitting our biennial budget request, we have many discussions with and within each of those sectors. And we take into account the number and amount of awards that were provided in the previous 2 years, how many students were served, how many students were not served but were eligible. And then each sector submits their request to our board, and our board discusses that, and that is part of the biennial budget request. Their requests, or what is approved by our board, is also submitted when we do our biennial budget request as part of that, in addition to the request for the funds that we need to run our agency. Students apply for a Wisconsin grant when they file their FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. If the student indicates on a FAFSA that they will be attending at least one college or university in Wisconsin, our agency receives that information. The information is then downloaded into our system, and using the formula that was developed by our board with in consultation with each sector, the amount of money that that student is eligible for is That's how the amount of money is calculated. And then in order to get the money, the financial aid office submits a request to our office through their system. This is the student, they have an award, and then we can send it out to them. The students are awarded by order of application, and they must be enrolled at least half-time to receive a Wisconsin grant. And the awards are calculated accordingly, so they don't get a full award if they're only going half-time. So they're either half-time or full-time in order to get an award. And again, you know, if the college doesn't get the information, then if the student isn't attending their college or university, and they don't list a Wisconsin school on their free application for federal student aid, then they are not eligible for an award. Unfortunately, a lot of the students who apply for aid do not get aid because of the amount of funds that we have eligible. And also, we have noticed, the financial aid staff, we talk about this at our Wisconsin Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators meetings, that a lot of the students who are lowest income tend to submit their FAFSAs later. So that is one of the problems that we have in order to get aid to the most needy students. We also have a few smaller grants, and to be considered for these grants, the students must typically be nominated by a financial aid office professional. In one case, they're nominated by the Wisconsin Education Opportunities Program, which is located at the Department of Public Instruction. And we also have some forgivable loans for specific professions. For example, the minority teacher loan or teachers of the visually impaired loan. We do work very closely with the financial aid offices to promote these grants and loans. And the sectors also are aware of this, and they work with their own staff to do that. Our agency also oversees the Minnesota-Wisconsin Reciprocity Agreement and capitation programs, which provide funds to the Marquette School of Dentistry and to the Medical College of Wisconsin. And we work with the United States Department of Justice to administer the John R. Justice Loan Forgiveness Program. Finally, we administer the Wisconsin Academic Excellence Scholarship, which goes to the student in each of the high schools in Wisconsin that has the highest grade point average. If they're a school under 80, we pool some of those schools together. And then we also have the Technical Excellence Scholarship, which goes to the student with the highest demonstrated level of proficiency in technical education. So we have some other smaller programs that I haven't mentioned. So with 10 people in the office, sometimes on Thursday, I let people have a bathroom break. But I will say that they are such a hardworking and wonderful and fun. We have a really fun group of people, so I'm very fortunate. There are some agencies similar to ours in other states that do provide general student loans to students, but that is not something that we do in Wisconsin. If students need additional loans or help, they work with their higher education institutions to find out where they can go to look for some of those loans. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. I know that I have 10 minutes remaining before the governor is going to be on, so I could, you know, if there aren't any questions, let me know, but we would really appreciate any questions or concerns that you have. And I don't know if either Kimani or Kevin want to talk about some of the things that they do as financial aid administrators. One of the things that Secretary Blumenfeld asked was if I could make at least one recommendation. And one of the recommendations that I have heard from financial aid administrators about how to help with the amount of student debt that we have, that our students have to take on, is that if we could have enough money allocated to our individual programs enough funds that we could help more people who are middle class rather than those students with the lowest need. I know there are so many students who just don't qualify because their parents have too much of an income, but I know firsthand that a lot of those parents who don't have enough, that make too much money for their students to be able to get aid, many of those students come from families where they're just, I mean, they're making it, they're doing well, but they don't have the funds to pay for their students to go to college. One of the questions for the Wisconsin High, one of the questions is, are we able to fully fund, support every eligible student? No, Michelle Rosen, we are not able to support every student. The average, I don't know what, I can't tell you what the average or medium grant, Wisconsin grant award is. Sherry may be able to type that in. What is our current shortfall for eligible students? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, Michael Rosen, but I think that's probably part of one of the reports that we put out every year is how many students applied and how many were not eligible. There was a question by Representative Ballweg. Any thoughts on requirements? Oh, let's see.
Yes, so the question is, are there any thoughts on requirements for students to do a FAFSA? And
really, that's about the only, unless we had enough money to totally redo our system, and that's something we did when I held this position under Governor Doyle, and it would be very costly to redo our system. I don't think that we could even manage that in our system, and then I am not sure how we would go about it. When students do the FAFSA, one of the things that we consider is the estimated family contribution. So that tells us what, and again, if there was, the estimated family contribution tells how much the parents are expected to provide or expected to be able to provide. If we had more funds and were able to open that up more, the expected family contribution would drop. I mean, it naturally, you have more money, it can fund more people. I don't know how else we would be able to do it, but that's always a question. We're always looking for anything. I think our HEAB board is always looking for anything that would help. If underfunded, can you quantify the gap for four-year university and for tech college students? And that's by Michael Rosen. I would say that the gap between those, it's very different because they're very separate appropriations. So are you asking which, I'm not quite sure I understand. I'm not quite sure I understand the question about the gap.
so just to give a couple of these questions, Connie, for our phone listeners too, because some information is coming in via the chat. One of the questions is, what is the average and medium Wisconsin grant amounts awarded? They understood that the maximum was $3,150. Some of the responses is that the average grant depends on the sector and that the Great. And the WTCS 2018-19 average grant was $802. And then also the UW 2018-19 average grant was $2,027. And the WAICU 2018-19 average grant was $2,850. And then another question so that's to give everyone a baseline there. And then to another question, I think that's to you is also interested in the first come, first serve rule. So there must be a question in regards to first come, first serve. Do you have any information on that?
Well, it is based on when they put in their FAFSA, when they filed their FAFSA. And that is an interesting question that we have talked about, but we really don't know how that could work, because when we talk about late applications, we're talking about students applying after they've already gone to school. So many students apply very early before they are actually attending. And so I don't know, I mean, then you're cutting off people who actually qualify for the award, but not quite enough. But that is something that I would definitely be able to take to our board and see if there is some kind of solution to that. It would also would require quite a bit of change to our system, which would require a lot of money.
Okay, and do you have information as to how many tech college students do not get served and how many university students don't get served?
We have quite a bit of that information on our website under what's called a WSIS report, Wisconsin, maybe Sherry can type in. That's something that we provide to the board in our spring meeting every year. And that was just provided for the last year. That was provided to our board at our last meeting. So that's something that you can look up on our website under board reports.
Sounds like a link that we'll send out in response to the e-binders to get people access to that. Let's see. What communication and outreach strategies are being implemented to reach lower income students who tend to apply late?
We work pretty closely with the Wisconsin Education Opportunities Program at the Department of Public Instruction. And because they do reach out to a lot of those students as well. We also are very involved in the Wisconsin high school counselors. I work with the Wisconsin Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, with WASFA, to do presentations to high school counselors to encourage them to get all their students, to encourage them to help the students make sure they're filing their FAFSA in a timely manner. And that's something that WASFA has been involved in for quite some time. I know there are some colleges or some states that require students to file a FAFSA prior to graduating from high school. And we have talked about doing that, but because we don't have an unlimited, number of funds so that we could fund everybody, I've heard from some financial aid officials that that's not something that they think would be a good idea for us, because it's kind of indicating to a student that if you qualify, you'll get the money, and they don't. So it just, essentially what it would do is have a lot more students who find out that they're eligible, but the funds have run out at this point.
I'm going to circle back to the first come, first serve rule concept. Is that set by statute or rule? Because there's an inquiry as to whether that could be changed.
Well, whether it's set by statute or rule, it could be changed if we wanted it to be changed. We'd either have the board change the rule or the legislature, or we'd, if it's something that people think that we should do, that we would change the statute. I mean, it's something that you can work on, whether it's a rule or a statute. And again, let me just say that this is something that before we would do anything, we would have, of course, discussions with the governor's office, but also with the four sectors that we work with to see, not only would it change our processes, but it would probably change theirs as well. And also to find out from them, how that would work in their offices.
Okay. And Sherry has provided some additional information. Wisconsin Grant UW average award is $2,551. Wisconsin Grant Technical College Average Award is $995, and Wisconsin Grant Private Nonprofit is $3,215. And there was another contribution that the max amount is also set by the sector or region and area.
Right.
So just to clarify my earlier statement about what the max was. And then another question for you, is there information on the number of students from each institutions receiving grants?
Yes, that would be included in our WSIS report, and I believe Sherry or somebody has put the link up on the chat board.
That just got posted. And then what demographic information do you collect on grant applicants and recipients?
I don't believe we collect demographic information, but Sherry may know that. We don't ask race, ethnicity, those things. So we don't know about that.
Okay. And for those on the phone, we will share this link and website information, but the website again is heab.wi.gov if you'd like to look before the links get sent out. And I think our final question is, what are the alternative recommendations students get referred to if they are eligible for financial aid grants, but there is not enough funding to award them anything?
Well, I can tell you that different colleges and universities have loan servicers that they refer students to. And if they're not eligible for those, I know that they are provided information about Parent Plus loans. And that's something that, again, Kevin McShane or Kimani might be able to answer as they actually work in those offices.
Great. Let's see. There was Sherry also contributed, for anyone on the phone or not seeing the chat, is that they do have regional designations in the WISSIS report. So there will be more information available there.
Great. There's a lot of information in that.
Well, great. Connie, any last thoughts that you'd like to leave the task force with, or any final recommendations you would like to
I do
consider?
think this is a very important issue for the state to be dealing with student loan debt, and because it does affect not just the students, but it also affects our communities where those students, those former students who are now out in the workforce, are spending their money paying off their debt rather than spending their money in their local communities. And I'm sure there's a solution out there, and I know that this group will come up with some very good recommendations. Oh, if there still is a question, are there other states that have something like HEAB? Every state has an agency that deals with student aid, and many of the agencies throughout the country have more responsibilities than we do, such as actually providing loans, state loans to students. So yes, and I'm part of the Midwest Higher Education Compact. So, and also the National Financial Aid Administrators Work Group. We network with them on a regular basis, as do the financial aid officers throughout the state.
Great. Thank you very much for your information, Connie, and presenting here today. I'm sure there'll be some follow-up questions that will get shared, but thank you very much for all that great information and your leadership in this area.
Thank you.
And I'm going to turn it over to Secretary Blumenfeld at this point in time for our next introduction.
Great. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Executive Secretary Hutchinson. That was great. And You do have an amazing team, and we so appreciate your leadership and your participation on the task force as well. So with that, I believe, do we have Governor Evers in the house?
We
Just
have
sign-
been checking, so we are seeking. We've not seen the appearance yet, so
Should we take a 2-minute stretch break?
I think that's an excellent idea. If everyone would like to just go refill that coffee cup, we'll put the mics on mute and regather at 10:47. Oh, he just joined.
Okay, well, great. Well, we'll delay that stretch break, but obviously, if you need to refill, go ahead. But we are thrilled and honored today to have Governor Tony Evers with us. As many of you know, he is the 46th governor of Wisconsin and very dedicated to education. And prior to his election, as many of you know, he served as the Wisconsin State Superintendent of Public Instruction, winning statewide elections in 2009, 2013, and 2017. So with over 3 decades of public education experience, Governor Evers has dedicated his life to fighting for Wisconsin kids and serving the people of Wisconsin. As a lifelong educator, the governor believes in bringing people together to solve problems facing our state. Hence, we are here today. Born and raised in Plymouth, Wisconsin, Governor Evers graduated from Plymouth High School, earned his bachelor, master's, and doctoral degrees in education administration from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's married to his high school sweetheart, Kathy, who is also an educator, and they are parents of 3 adult children, all public school graduates, and have 9 wonderful grandchildren. So, Governor Evers, it's an honor to serve on your cabinet, and we welcome you here today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kathy. And yeah, it's 9 wonderful grandchildren, although there are times when they may be less than wonderful, but I'd say overall they're wonderful. So good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you all virtually this morning. And thanks for serving on this task force, and a special thanks to Secretary Blumenfeld for leading it. Now more than ever, we face additional challenges with the COVID-19 pandemic to address the growing student debt problem that is burdening many of our citizens. Student debt isn't going to go away anytime soon, but this task force will be a meaningful first step in addressing this crisis in our state, bolstering our economy, and building a state that works for everyone. As I've traveled the state before this pandemic, visiting schools and businesses and talking with local job creators, it's clear that attracting a diverse workforce and investing in the foundations of a good quality of life are going to be critical to growing Wisconsin's economy, especially post-pandemic. And it will come to no surprise that I believe this development starts with education. But unfortunately, whether 2-year, 4-year, or technical degree, far too many Wisconsinites who are seeking additional education and career training, it's out of their reach. According to the Institute for College Access and Success, 64% of the class of 2018 in Wisconsin graduated with more than $30,000 of student loan debt. And 1 in 5 students nationally are behind in their student loan payments. And we know that education-related debt disproportionately affects students of color, low-income students, first-generation college students, women and veterans, all folks that we need to be part of our economy, because we know that diversity makes us stronger. Not only that, but affects families as parents take on more debt to help their kids get a good quality education. That is very important how it impacts families. It's preventing folks from buying cars and homes, starting businesses, saving for retirement, and starting a family. And that is ultimately holding back our state and our economy. And we can't afford to do that as we move out of the, well, we're going to be in the pandemic for some time, but as we move to open up our economy, that we don't want anything holding us back. So it's time to take action to address college affordability and to ensure that a great education doesn't come at the cost of decades of crippling debt. That's why you're here. I created this task force to assess the causes of student debt and the challenges of student debt creates for Wisconsinites, their families, and our state economy. I remember, now this is going to age me here, but I can remember going to UW-Madison and started in 1969. And I was able to go there for 4 years, get my bachelor's degree, and never borrow a penny, and for various reasons. It used to be if you worked during the summer, that was enough to cover your tuition. Well, that is obviously not the case anymore. So I truly appreciate all of you for taking the time to study and explore the effectiveness of current policy relating to student debt and potential solutions to this critical issue affecting Wisconsinites. So most importantly, I am absolutely jazzed and looking forward to hearing your recommendations on how the state can best address this crisis and improve financial literacy in financial literacy education and protect vulnerable consumers by preventing abusive practices. So, I know you've got a lot of work to do, but thank you for tackling this issue head on. Your work here is valued, respected, and essential to the prosperity of Wisconsin. So I hope you have a great rest of your meeting, and thanks again. Take it away, Kathy.
Thank you, Governor Evers. I appreciate it. And we look forward to sharing our recommendations at the end of August when we complete our series of meetings. So I think we're all grateful for your leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So next up, we have 2 speakers that are going to talk to us and share their knowledge, which is considerable, on affordability, disparate impact, and recommendations for what our task force can do. So I'd like to introduce to you 2 very distinguished folks from the UW, and one is Dr. Feneba Addo, who is the Lorna Jorgensen Wendt Professor of Money, Relationships, and Equality, called MORE, in the School of Human Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Addo is currently a faculty affiliate of the Center for Financial Security, Institute for Research in Poverty, Center for Demography and Ecology, and the La Follette School of Public Affairs. Also, Dr. J. Michael Collins is the faculty director of the Center of Financial Security at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Fetzer Family Chair in Consumer and Personal Finance in the School of Human Ecology, a professor at the La Follette School of Public Affairs, and a family economics specialist for the Division of Extension. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Collins and Dr. Addo, and very excited to have you both here with us today.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you loud and clear.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and get these slides up. So thanks for bearing with me, everyone. All right, well, thank you all for being part of this task force, and thanks for listening to our content today. So I'm Michael Collins. I'm going to start off, and then I'm going to hand off to Feneba after about 20 minutes or so, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A, both using the mic and also using the chat function. So we'll try to keep track of that as we go. So I am at the University of Wisconsin at the Center for Financial Security and have partnered with many of you on the line. We broadly study issues of household finance And in recent years, obviously, the issue of student loans, student debt, how people get returns to education has become an important part of all that. I'll let Fenaba talk a little bit about herself when she takes over the slides. So I think one place to start is just a basic question of why do we have universities? I pose this question with my students in our applied economics class of what is it that we have of the institutions that have lasted for over 300 years, the vast majority of them are universities. What is it about them that lasts so long? And, you know, some students are here for that academic experience, for, you know, being part of that culture. Some are here for the lifestyle and the opportunity to make friends. But ultimately, the question comes back to, we're here to become more skilled in order to be more successful at whatever it is our goal might be. So maybe that's a profession, maybe it's in art, maybe it's in some other kind of field, but we're trying to make ourselves better in some way that ultimately lets us do the things we want to do. And so for a lot of students, that is getting a job. It's getting a job in a field that they are compelled and really feel like they want to make some impact around. So many of our students are at college in order to gain that what economists call human capital. They're investing in themselves so they can get a return later in life. You know, we can think a lot about higher education as a public good. We're all better off when more people have more education because they have more skills. They can generate, you know, the more they invest in themselves, the more they invest in that human capital, the more they can generate for everybody. So, you know, if you think about the Wisconsin idea, this idea that goes back over 100 years, it's, you know, that's really where this is embedded. It's where the land grant university comes from, that we somehow are all better off when we have better technologies at that time for farming, but now for all sorts of activities in our community. So we all benefit when we have good higher education. We can develop new knowledge, new creative endeavors. We can be able to transfer that knowledge to the next generation and build from there. But I think what's important about education is it's not just a public good. So it's not just helping the community, it's also helping individuals. The people who are at school, who are gaining skills, are able to come out of the other side of their education with the ability to make more money. They're able to get a return on that human capital investment by having a higher income throughout the rest of their career. So if you graduate at age 22 and you're able to make an extra 10 or 15% a year for 40 years of working years, that's a pretty good return on investment. We also have to recognize that there are lots of other economic impacts of attending higher education. Many people create their social networks based on who they attend school with. They find their spouses, they you know, set up a lot of their future life pathway or trajectory based on their experiences at school. And so for traditional students who enter school at a younger age and come out and, you know, sort of in young adulthood with this new social network, it gives them the ability to be entrepreneurs, to find jobs, to do all kinds of things that gives them advantages in life. But, you know, as we think about the issues of higher education, it also has some impact on the rest of us. So one thing we can think about is, you know, what does it mean for society when people have more education? Well, the more education people have, the less likely they are to be in public assistance programs. So, you know, conversely, the less education people have, the more likely they are to be in public assistance programs. So this is a direct cost to, you know, to the society of people who have less education are more likely to need some of these safety net programs. Now, is this causal? Not necessarily. Some of the same issues that cause people to maybe need Medicaid or food assistance are the same issues that prevent them from getting higher education. But still, I think it starts to make the point of that there is some public good aspect. There's some reason why we have communities and society and this sort of public role in higher education. The other thing we can think about is that over time, more and more jobs require more education. So when we see more and more students enrolling in school, this isn't just some sort of, you know, trend or fad. This is students being responsive to the fact that the job market today requires more skills. And so we see a growing share of the proportion of jobs they're going to need higher, a bachelor's degree or higher, 4 years of education, of post-secondary education or higher, as going up. So this is an issue that students are responding to, and they're going back to school or attending school because they know that that's where the job market is pushing them to be. And this is really a global phenomenon. This isn't specific to Wisconsin or even the US. The other thing we've seen is across all different backgrounds, whether white, Black, Hispanic, a general growth, and this goes back to the 70s, of high school students enrolling in college. So in the 70s, barely a majority, so only 50% of whites and less than that for Blacks and Hispanics would graduate from high school and then enroll in a post-secondary education of some kind. Today, it's up to 2/3 and up to 70% for white. So obviously the gaps have gotten bigger, which is worrisome, but the general trend for all groups is higher. So more and more likely graduates of high school are considering and enrolling in college. The vast majority, 2/3 or 3/4 are. But there are some market failures. And again, this is sort of what we talk about with our students in our economics classes, is that this market for higher education is a really unusual market. It's not like a lot of other markets that consumers are engaged in. One is this issue of asymmetric information. I don't have the opportunity to choose to go to a college and then return what I bought and attend a different college. So I can transfer, but I have a high opportunity cost. I spent that year at that college or university that turns out I regretted spending. So this is a rare purchase. We don't have a lot of information. We're sort of going on faith that the choice that we're making is the right one. And universities can present information to young adults in ways that perhaps causes them to skew their choices. The other thing is that this is an experience good. So by experience good is we don't really know how good it is until we experience it. We can do the campus tour and we can go online, we can check things out, we can talk to people, but we don't really know. And most importantly, we don't really know what the future income potential is. We don't really know what that BS or BA will return in future income. We're kind of taking it on faith that it will actually result in a positive trajectory for income growth. It's also important to know that many schools are very selective, and that means they have a lot of power. They can choose which students to let in and not let in. And so these selective schools can basically say there's more demand than there is supply. And what do we know about the basics of economics? When demand is higher than supply, the price will start to go up. And so we start to see, especially for many schools, that the price has gone up over time. Students are willing to pay more and more for that 4-year degree. So we can look at some data. This is data from the College Board about what the returns are. And this is both the after-tax income as well as what the estimated taxes that each group will pay. And so, people in the median, so this is the midpoint, the middle of full-time workers, age 25 and older, do make more the more education they have. So a professional degree, doctoral degree, a master's degree, bachelor's degree, associate degree, you can kind of see this general higher trend over time. So if we think about just the associate's degree, you're talking about median earnings of $50,000, whereas a high school degree, the second to last column there, is $40,000, and less than high school is $30,000. So pretty big jumps just from a high school degree to an associate's degree, and then up to a bachelor's degree, another $15,000 from there. So the jumps get bigger and bigger. And this is partly, again, students are responding to that sort of rationally to that incentive. So as we prepared for this today, we were asked a little bit about the cost of education. And so, there is a model you can think about where basically we charge students what their future income will be, right? So you agree to pay a present value of what your future income boost will be. And that's sort of what tuition is. If you're going to earn an extra $500,000 over the next 40 years, we'll charge you, some portion of that now in return for that human capital investment. So that's sort of this net present value calculation. And there have been schemes that have talked about this for more than 50 years of how do we price tuition based on what your future income gains will be. And in a lot of ways, student loans are exactly that. We'll let you borrow what your future income will be, and you can pay that off over time to get to that point. We also have some things to think about too, of like, how can students make really rationally informed choices about what that future income will be, what that future earnings potential will be, and what if they're wrong? What if they choose a major that in 20 years is no longer a viable major or a career path? Or maybe even worse, what if the school misleads them and gives them information about a degree or a career pathway that turns out to not be what they said it was, or that they're not as good as they said it was, or they lie about their placement rate or any other kinds of things. So students can make rationally informed choices, but they can make mistakes, and they can also be misled by the institution. So if we think a little bit about what the costs of higher education are today, it varies tremendously based on the type of place that students attend. So the very first top column here, or top bar going across, is the public 2-year with a commuter. So a commuter has very little expenses other than transportation. They have a lot of a lot of efficiencies in the fact that they're living at home, or otherwise reducing their room board costs. The school itself actually costs less as well. The tuition and fees are much less than the next option down the line. So the next option down the line is a 4-year in-state on campus. So this would be like one of our state schools here, 4-year degree. That the average full-time budget for a student would be about $26,000 per year, almost $27,000 per year. And out of state is going to cost more. Any parent who's been looking at schools with their children knows this math, that it's almost double to send your kid out of state versus in state, at least the sticker price, which we can talk a bit about. And then a nonprofit private school can be well over $50,000, almost $54,000. So the budget that students pay is considerable, but it varies widely. So when we talk about students, we really have to be thinking about this wide variation from the 2-year degree to the 4-year degree to the public and to the private. We can also look at the costs over time. And so I think this is what many people who follow higher education have been really concerned about, is that particularly the public 4-year cost of education, the published, again, this is sticker price. This is not necessarily the price that students pay, because many students do get aid and other kinds of things that reduce their costs. But, on average, it's almost tripled what it was back in 1989. So almost 2.97 is almost 3 times, right? So big increase in cost among public 4-year. 2 years doubled, and even private nonprofit year-round, or 4-year around doubled. So all have seen an increase. The public has seen more, and there's been lots of analysis of what's driving this. Much of this is cuts to state and federal aid. So I guess this comes to the question of some judgments that we have to make, is how much do students pay? Should they pay the total cost, a share of the total cost, some share of their personal income? I think these aren't subtle questions. We're sort of playing with lots of different models in different universities and in different states and localities today. We could also charge different amounts based on their ability to pay. We could charge different amounts on different programs. So, a student in a business program might pay more than a student in an arts program, for example. We might also charge more or less depending upon what time of day they take their class. Do they, pay less in the summer than they do when in the main year? Or, do we have other kinds of ways do we think about this? And then how much should we subsidize? Should we subsidize all majors or only certain majors? Should we subsidize STEM? Should we subsidize education? Lots of important questions that I think universities and educators struggle with a lot when we think about what is the right way to target our affordability measures. We do have obviously lots of support. You just heard a little bit about FAFSA. That's the main avenue that students get into the student aid system. We have tax credits, which are another opportunity that are out there. Pell Grants, which is the main way that lower income families are able to have subsidies for education, just straight up grants. Now, obviously, it's not enough to pay for everything, but it certainly helps students who are qualified. And then the big one is loans, and that's probably what we're mostly here to talk about. But there are many different kinds of loans, but the federally backed loan, the federally subsidized loan, really is at the core of any loan package that students are receiving, even if they're taking part in Pell and tax credits and other kinds of programs. So you can see a little bit about the aid that's available for students out there. So just to give you a sense of this, is over time, over about the last 10 years. The very lowest orange bar there are Pell Grants, the federal Pell Grants, which is it's been pretty consistent over time, about 15%, 15 to 20%. It's gone down a little bit in recent years of that total aid that's out there. Veterans benefits is a relatively small group. State grants is actually relatively small, which we just talked a little bit about. Institutional grants, so this is the actual institution itself, the college or university's own support. It's about a quarter, so a size and rising over time. Private, grants, employer grants, those kinds of relatively small. And then federal loans, which has actually shrunk a bit. So it was larger in the beginning of the 2000 or the last of the 2000, the aughts, and has shrunk down. But still, we're talking about a third of the costs are borne by federal loans. And then obviously the end of the federal education and tax benefits are relatively small at the very top, though. So really, loans are the major, in most years, the major tool that are available from public sector support for students. So FAFSA, we talked about this, I won't talk too much about it, but DPI has a website where you can look at district by district, the dashboard of FAFSA eligibility and FAFSA use. The big thing about FAFSA to remember is that students have to renew it. They have to actually take a proactive step to do this. And students who choose to take part in FAFSA are much more likely to attend school. So, getting especially, high school sophomores and juniors familiar with FAFSA, understanding that process and really making it part of, their preparation for college is really important, because it's going to be something they're going to have to be working with over time. It's like filing taxes, right? So we talk about that with students. It's one of these tasks that you're going to have to do. It's one of these early adulthood tasks that you're going to have to learn to do pretty regularly. When we think about how affordability is determined, it all comes down to this effective family contribution. This is all part of the FAFSA, but it's, basically it's a way that we balance family size, how many students in the family are in college, enrolled in college, family income, other factors that are related to figure out what the student's eligibility is for assistance. And so that's really what FAFSA helps us to do as an institution, is to figure out what that expected family contribution is. In other words, how much does the family or the student have to contribute if they're not an independent student. So Pell Grants, I just want to touch on quickly is this is our main federal grant aid system, that's out there to support students. It has grown in recent years, but and these are inflation adjusted. These are 2018 dollars. So in real terms, they're not as much as they used to be. And then the maximum, while the maximum today is 6,000, the average participant doesn't get 6,000. They only get about 4,000. So these are certainly very, very important. They're sort of critical foundational support for low-income students to get into the higher education system, but it's obviously not enough. And for many students, it's just it opens the door. It doesn't necessarily get them through. In terms of spending per student, I know this is something you've probably talked a bit about before, but the best way to think about spending per student is relative to the state's income. So we expect a lower income state to spend less on education and a higher income state to spend more on education. So this is all per $1,000 in state income. And you can see Wisconsin's kind of in the middle. I drew an arrow because it's not easy to see. So we're sort of on par with Michigan, which maybe I guess makes us feel a little bit better. But the funding per student is about the same. And then our funding per public student is about the same. Certainly less than the average US overall, roughly 2/3 of the US average overall, less than some, states like Alaska and Hawaii, but, more than states like Pennsylvania or West Virginia. Talking about loans now, I think the big thing that we always talk about with students is subsidized versus unsubsidized loans. The big thing about the subsidized loans is that, again, through the FAFSA, you qualify for this process. While you're a student, you don't have to pay for the interest. And, that actually provides some protection for students while they're a student. Students have both. I should say, often students have both a subsidized and then need more aid, so they go to an unsubsidized loan. But really the bedrock of the federal loan system is this subsidized loan. Then there are private loans. So, private loans, student loans are sometimes billed directly by schools as part of that application and admissions package. Many students do use these, whether it's with a parent or individually. There are some disadvantages. The price can be higher. They have less flexibility. In terms of when they struggle to repay, they don't have as many workout options, and then obviously the interest payments. Sometimes cosigners are required. The dischargeability of these loans in bankruptcy or death and disability. These are all issues that you sort of have to warn students about. And the big thing is that you have to really shop around as a student because the prices of the rates and terms really can vary quite a bit. So, those loans that are directly sold by the school are often ones that we hear from consumers about and often see in data as being problematic. Quickly, I want to touch on this issue of rising college costs. We do see faculty being competed away. We hear that all the time of faculty have to be retained because other institutions will compete for them. We also worry about the productivity of faculty with more and more administrative costs. Does that drive some of the cost? I think the jury's out on some of this, but it's some of both. But a lot of the tuition cost rising in public institutions tends to be because there's been a cut in other support that's out there. There's a lot of discussion about amenities, so that's gyms or mental health services or career services, other things that students expect today that maybe they didn't get 20 years ago. And certainly that drives costs a little bit. Some schools segregate those fees and costs so that they're not bundled into tuition, but still it's an out-of-pocket cost for students. The issue of administration is an ongoing debate in the field of whether administrative costs are a result of federal and other mandates and requirements and regulations, or if it's just sort of administrative bloat. Certainly administration costs are rising more than instructional costs, so it is something that needs some analysis. And then I think the biggest thing to think about is sticker price versus net price. Oftentimes when you see news stories about the price of education, it's the sticker price, that's the published tuition, not the net price after scholarships and other kinds of support that students get. So making that distinction is really important. And here you can just see the average aid per student is actually going up over time. So, more and more students are getting grants and aid, often institutional aid. And it's not statistically enormous in terms of the amount of the change in federal loans, but the federal loans are pretty flat and even declining a little bit in recent years. So yes, more and more students are going to school, more and more students have loans, but the average loan per student isn't skyrocketing the way that you might think it is when you read, the headlines sometimes in the papers. All right, so last thing to think a little bit about, and then I'll hand it over to Fenaba, who go into much more detail on this, is that there are some vulnerable groups who we do worry a bit more about. So students who themselves come from maybe first generation and don't have anybody in their family to guide them about where to choose, what to major in, how to handle school, those kinds of things. Students who come out of lower performing high schools who maybe aren't as well prepared and don't have the supports from where they came from. The whole issue of people who have less financial experience, call it financial literacy, financial capability, getting through FAFSA, getting through the loan documents, getting through just the process of managing their experience. And then, service members, groups who come back to school later in life, the sort of various groups like that oftentimes are a disadvantage. But the two biggest groups I want to focus on are the students who fail to graduate, so they never get that degree and never get, therefore, that return on investment. And then the students who take a long time to graduate, who maybe enter a 2-year program but take 4 years, or enter a 4-year program and take 6 years. Those are students that we also worry quite a bit about. So this is just the, the completion rates by different sectors. So we have the publics and the privates and the for-profits. And then also by income. This is a lot going on this graph, so I apologize, and their GPA. So higher GPA students, most likely to complete at all income levels. But even among, this public 4-year, higher GPA, low income students are only about 2/3 as likely to finish their degree. So, completion really matters, and we see wide variation in completion by income level, by GPA, and by the institution that students attend. And then what that results in, especially the students who don't complete, is they have pretty large loans. Pretty small loans, but there's a lot of them. So we have 17% of borrowers who have less than $5,000. So, you attend school for a short period of time, you pick up a loan, and then you end up with not a degree and a small loan that bogs you down over time. There's actually a very small number of people who have these very large loans. So if you look at the very bottom there, the 200,000 or more, or even the 100,000 or more, they're a large percentage of the total debt. But if you add up those last two, there's only 7% of all borrowers. So 35% of the debt is held by 7% of the borrowers. These tend to be students in professional degree programs, doctors, lawyers, other kinds of high cost professional degrees. And then finally, just a little bit about the for-profit sector, which I know you've talked a little bit about before, but it's really important to remember it's not apples to apples when we talk about, say, private nonprofit or for-profit or other kinds of. The students that choose to attend different types of schools really varies. So many of the for-profit institutions are open access. There's no barrier to application or enrollment other than having that high school degree. So the nonprofit private schools tend to be much more selective. They have far fewer independent students, whereas the for-profits tend to be people maybe later in life coming back to school. So it's a different marketplace. The for-profits tend to serve lower income as opposed to the nonprofit private. So, we see lots of differences in who attends each type of school. And sometimes I think we color a whole industry when really a lot of the difference is driven by who attends each of these different kinds of schools. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Fenaba. I'll just click for you, Fenaba, if you just say next.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. So for several years, my colleague Jason Houle and I have been interested in the disproportionate burden of student loan debt among Black borrowers. Our work has shed light on the increased financial risk of pursuing a college education in a society that requires expensive credentials, of populations that are under-resourced, the least wealthy, and face systematic barriers to wealth building opportunities. So as of December 2019, 40 million borrowers now owe over $1.6 trillion in aggregate student loan debt. This has surpassed credit card and auto loan debt and is second to mortgage debt on the household balance sheet. Next. So while aggregate student, can you go back? Thank you. So while aggregate student loan debt grew exponentially since the early 2000s, racial disparities in student debt also widened. Beginning before and continuing throughout the Great Recession, racial disparities in student loan debt increased both in the proportion of households that carry loans, as well as the percentage of the household debt portfolio that is comprised of student loan debt. Although the rates for both Black and white households were increasing, the rate for Black households increased faster than white households. Next. At all levels of education, some college, certificates, bachelor's, and graduate degrees, Black students are also more likely to borrow to fund their education. Next. In addition, they also disproportionately take on more debt for their degrees. As the chart on this slide indicates, Black students comprise 12% of all bachelor degree recipients in the 2015-2016 academic year. 64%, or almost 2/3, have over $30,000 worth of debt, and 1/3 had over $40,000. Next, please. So default rates for student debt are also stratified by race, with the most consistent predictors of student loan default being race and institutional sector. So non-Latinx Black borrowers and borrowers who attend for-profit institutions have the highest default rates. Default rates for Black borrowers exceed white borrowers independent of whether they completed their studies. In 10 years post-graduation, Black borrowers owed 51% of their initial loan debt, and 21% had some experience with non-payment, either through loan deferment or forbearance. Next. Credit report data also reveals that Black and Native American borrowers had the highest default and delinquency rates. So delinquency being behind usually between 60 to 120 days, and default is a defaulting for or having not paid on your loan for over 9 months. Next, please. Another area I have been exploring is the intergenerational nature of indebtedness, which is also present in the student debt sector. So the amount of debt that Black borrowers take on for themselves exceeds other race and ethnicity groups, but so does the amount of debt that they take on for their children and grandchildren's education, which is second to Latinx borrowers. Given the average and median Black or Latinx household has less income or wealth, these larger loan amounts translate to a greater household debt burden. Next, please. In our research, we argue that racial disparities in debt, accrual, and repayment reflect processes of racialized economic hardship and discrimination that accumulate across the life course for recent cohorts of young adults, and that both existing and historical processes of racial stratification and exclusion compound across the life course to create inequalities in debt and debt burden. For example, family wealth is a particularly important resource that drives racial disparities in debt. As college costs have shifted from the government to families, a family's ability to pay for college will increase with their wealth position. So in work that we've done, we find that there is a negative relationship between wealth and debt accumulation. When we disaggregate by race, however, for white youth, we see that that relationship holds, that negative relationship. Whereas for Black youth, at the most basic level, wealth was not associated with the amount of debt that their children accumulated. Next slide, please. In our data, white parents on average contributed $12,000 over the course of their child's college career, whereas Black parents contributed approximately $4,200. So the wealth distributions are so incredibly disparate that Black parents only compose 3.2% of the top wealth quintile, which in our data was a net wealth of at least $191,000. These families have substantially less home equity and only 1/2 the financial assets of whites at similar points in the distribution. Black parents at the high end of the wealth distribution may be less able to transfer wealth to their children than their white counterparts, perhaps due to having fewer liquid assets such as stocks, bonds, or savings accounts, which can be passed down more easily to the next generation. Next slide, please. But you don't need to look only at wealth to uncover these patterns. In this slide, we see that even after adjusting for the expected family contribution and grant aid, college costs comprise a larger proportion of Latinx families' incomes. And so it's 16% compared to 8% for white households. Next slide, please. Black young adults are also more likely to enroll in for-profit institutions or attend underfunded schools, which are associated with higher levels of debt accumulation. Although Black students made up 16% of the undergraduate population in 2011, they were disproportionately represented in for-profit institutions, both at the 2- and 4-year sector level. So those are the what's circled in red. Next slide, please. As young adults, Black youth also experience hardship and discrimination in the labor market that makes debt more burdensome to repay. So Black college graduates report higher rates of unemployment or underemployment, defined here as holding positions that did not require a college degree. Experimental research also has revealed that even among college graduates, Black youth are less likely to obtain job offers and receive offers for lower paying positions with fewer options for career advancement than their white college graduate counterparts. Next slide, please. So these examples I just provided shed some light on how racial disparities in debt are tied to racialized processes that occur prior to college entry, are associated with the post-secondary institutional characteristics, and continue to manifest upon school leaving. We find that racial disparities in debt are large and they increase across the early adult life course. Next slide, please. So more specifically, we find that Black young adults have 55% more debt than white young adults, and that the Black-white student loan debt disparity grows by about 7.2% annually. We also find that Black youth are paying down their debt at a rate of 2.9% compared with 9.5% for white adults. That is, Black youth start their young adult careers with more debt than whites, and that the disparity is growing over time. So what does this all mean? Next slide. Rising debt may now be a mechanism by which racial inequalities are spread across generations. In an era of rising costs and the necessity of higher education, these disparities may have long-term consequences for racial inequalities in wealth. Next slide, please. So racial wealth gaps in young adulthood mirror broader wealth inequality in the United States. In our analysis, we found that Black young adults hold about 10% less wealth relative to their white counterparts due to higher student debt burdens. So if not for those debt disparities, then we would see the wealth gap close by about 10%. Next slide, please. I always also like to show this slide, which Michael also sort of alluded to in his presentation earlier, that because it clearly indicates that the majority of millennials and subsequent generations, such as the Generation Z folk, have some experience with post-secondary education, right? So when we hear numbers like 35% of Americans hold a college degree, it masks the reality that a significant large number of individuals who have some college but no degree, and increasingly some or a significant amount have debt and no degree. So for this slide, yes, next slide, please. So for this slide and the next two slides, I'm going to pivot slightly to present some short and long-term consequences of student debt. So we see here that this chart presents differences in repayment rates of federal student loans among borrowers who ended repayment between 2006 and 2011. Degree non-completers have the lowest repayment rates, and borrowers who attended a for-profit institution have the lowest rates independent of degree status. Of course, what is not reflected here are differences in employment rates and income levels and how they vary by institutional sector and degree completion. Next slide, please. I also want to present some results from my earliest work on student debt, which examined its relationship with relationship formation in young adulthood. My work found that women with student debt were more likely to delay marriage and transition into cohabitation or non-marital co-residential relationships. My study suggested that women's debt influenced transitions into both informal and formal unions, and is key to understanding contemporary changes in family formation processes for recent cohorts of young adults. Next slide, please. So when Jason and I began this work, there were relatively few studies exploring the disproportionate role of student debt among Black students. That has changed. So in June of 2018, a letter was sent to the current Secretary of Education by several US senators that raised attention to the ways in which the federal student loan program was disproportionately impacting students of color. And in early 2019, 4 senators put out a call for stakeholder input on how to address racial disparities in student debt. A year ago, Robert Smith, an African-American billionaire, announced during his commencement speech at Morehouse College, which is a historically Black, all-male elite college, a pledge to eliminate the student loan debt of the graduating class, which would be an estimated $40 million. This was a generous gift, and it shed light on the racial disparities in student loan debt and highlighted the fact that eliminating this debt very early in their lives could have transformative impacts on graduates. The gift and the attention it received underscored the importance of this issue, not to mention the educational debt burden of HBCU college students. However, as we transition to the end of this presentation, I want to raise that reliance on philanthropic gifts to solve a policy issue raises some thorny questions. For example, the financial burden of graduates who were lucky enough to receive this gift is undoubtedly lighter. But what about the class that graduated before them or the one that's graduating this year? Whose role is it to pay for higher education, as Michael asked earlier? So to date, we have decided that students and their families should bear a significant portion of the cost, despite evidence that the value added of a post-secondary degree accrues beyond the individual. So in September, I was asked to contribute to a Washington Post article on solutions to address the debt burden faced by Black borrowers. Given the work that I had done highlights disparities in both the accumulation and the repayment process, I argued that there was no one solution, but that efforts to address racial wealth inequality were important for substantive, long-term generational change. Next slide, please. So I'm going to bring Michael back for us to discuss this last slide, which raises some considerations for the group, the task force, as well as some recommendations that we have as you move your conversation forward over the next few weeks. First being, who is the target when we think about student debt? We know that it varies significantly. Student debt accumulation varies significantly by demographics, by the types of schools that these young adults are attending, as well as how much they cost. One thing I like to ask people when I present is, what are you sure that the solution that you're presenting is not going to perpetuate existing societal inequalities? That requires being intentional and thinking a lot about who are the students that are most burdened by the debt load and their ability to pay it off over time. And are we going to be replicating the same inequalities in the solutions that we're proposing? Are we cherry picking with regard to the types of solutions that we're thinking about? So are we offering smaller amounts of debt refinancing for higher risk borrowers? or is much harder, or for those who are much harder than larger loans for low-risk borrowers, excuse me. I also often say when asked about my advice about for student debt is, we want to encourage not only students to become more knowledgeable about the financing of higher education, but also completion, right? So are we thinking about solutions that are tied to college completion as well as labor market success? And I could go into that a little bit more in the Q&A if you have questions around that, but really thinking about how do we get in and get students to finish on time. And also, are we bringing solutions to the table that are not always loan-based? Can we think about how we can increase grants to targeted populations that need it so that they don't have to deal with issues of default delinquency as they complete their studies, or after they've completed their studies? Michael?
Great. No, I think you hit all the high points. One thing we have to be humble about is that we don't know the answers. So your task force has some very difficult choices to think about, and if there was an easy silver bullet solution to this problem, it would already have occurred. So these are more questions, I think, than recommendations, but I think it is hard to really come up with a solution that will do everything that you want it to do. It's going to require some tough choices.
Thank you both very much for all the information and the thought-provoking questions that you leave us with. I'm going to take some of the questions we received in reverse, just so they are with the most recent topic a little bit. What are some best practices for getting more students to completion? If you'd be able to cover that.
Yeah, so there's, I can't speak to all of it, but there have been some great proposals. I know there's a professor at Harvard, David Deming, who has discussed tying federal aid to programs such as like mentoring programs and advocacy programs for students, and that they would receive more federal aid as they proved that they were getting students through completion. So I know that's something that's been proposed, but really thinking about what are the barriers, financial and non-financial, for current students while they are trying to navigate post-secondary education, and providing those to students so that they can complete their education.
And this expands on that or dives deeper, potentially. The question before that was even, what are root causes for less graduation rates and jobs among various minorities?
One of the factors, we did some research on this with some data from a major institution that I think is no longer in existence, where we looked at some of the factors that predicted just persistence from one term to another. And, remedial math turned out to be a really high predictor of a student not getting through their first year. If they came in not well prepared for college, and oftentimes that was correlated with coming out of a lower tier high school. They didn't have the basic, particularly math skills that were needed to be successful. And so they started out behind, they ended up in remedial math, they ended up losing ground and then weren't able to get through. So it is a complicated process because it's the dynamics of where students came from, how prepared they are, and then where they end up and how much support they get all together that results in some of these lower rates of persistence.
I think I'll add that I think for recent cohorts of young adults, there's an increasing risk associated with asking individuals to leave or take some time off from the labor market as the cost of college has increased. So there's always a risk of, foregone income and the opportunity cost of pursuing an education. But as those costs have increased, it's added to the risk of pursuing and completing your education.
The most recent question is about slide number 34. Dr. Otto, the CSA and other assets have higher amounts for African Americans. Can you elaborate further and or provide your hypothesis as to why this is?
So we actually, I can't speak to my own work, but there's actually quite a developed literature that has found that even despite the lower amount of resources that African Americans and Latinx families have, they actually provide more or supports and transfers to their children. So we can't just look at the financial constraints because it really speaks to the fact that they are providing for the students. It's just that our wealth inequality and income inequality in our society is so large is that they can't provide the same absolute transfers to their children. I think there is a push within our society to provide to want people to use individual development accounts or these private mechanisms for helping to save their way, to afford college, but it's just not enough, right? And so that's why I think what was so telling about our research was that we didn't see that negative relationship between wealth and debt accumulation among the African American households in our panel. It's just that even though being at the higher end of the wealth distribution in the Black community is still not having enough wealth to support or to fully fund a college education.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to the first half of the presentation and ask some of the questions that appeared at that point. Does the 2-year estimated cost include a recognition that many 2-year colleges appear to be going online for the near future at least, and that students will need home internet and that access and either Chromebook or laptop or some baseline equipment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head if they, because these data have been collected. I think these data were from College Board. I can skim back in a minute. I don't know that I think they're basically using their supplies as the required equipment that the school would have, stated in their public documents. So books and things like that. I don't know that many of them would have included things like laptops and internet access, but it's a great point that increasingly, no matter where you attend, that's going to be one of the expectations. And we've learned, if anybody have learned this last semester, a lot of students are living in places that don't have that kind of access. And so they can't be in a live chat, they can't be in a live video. And so it is definitely an issue both by geography and by income that we have to be concerned about.
There's been actually some more research recently, Professor Goldberg-Grab, on talking about the real cost of college. So not just the tuition, but what are the other additional costs that students incur, such as, now and, post-COVID, the internet access, but also prior to this, students that face issues of food insecurity, for example, and those, and housing insecurity as well. So thinking beyond the just the tuition and that cost.
Thank you. In the average of state and local funding for higher education, what is included? And there's a follow information that the direct money to public colleges and universities, Wisconsin grant financial aid, loan forgiveness programs, academic excellence support for Marquette Dental School, etc.
Yeah, these are, so this is a question I have to dig back into. This is the College Board's collection of data. So I think this is mostly going to be what's appropriated. But I can double check that and get back to you and find out what the College Board included in their data. But this is, I think, going to be mostly what they're able to find from public budgeting processes.
Great. We'll be sure to list that as a follow-up and include that additional information. You mentioned market failures and asymmetric information to the buyer. In some market sectors, these problems have been addressed through regulation. So could you comment on the regulatory environment around higher education, for-profit schools, and educational lending?
I think this is an issue that has been, there have been some regulatory actions on schools misrepresenting the quality of the degree and the income potential that can be coming from degrees. So in those few cases where we've actually seen some student loan debt forgiven due to fraud or malfeasance, it's been in cases where schools have been fraudulent about what they have purported to be the value of their degree. Now that's an extreme case. It's a really small portion of the total number of people who've maybe taken on a degree or taken on a school that wasn't a good match for them, or maybe they misperceived as to be a higher quality than it really is. There are some tools out there that are helpful. So there are these dashboards that allow you to both assess what various degrees and career pathways might return in terms of your investment, and also what different schools, in even down to the school level, some of these payback calculators that are out there. I think those tools are great. I love numbers. I love the accounting and the economics of it all. I've talked to a lot of students about how much they've used those, and the answer is very little. And so they tend still to make their choices based on other factors, whether that's the campus tour, the people they know, other kinds of things. And so I think the tools and the regulation are really helpful. A lot of this is going to come down to, the role of parents, the role of high schools, and then, for returning adults going back to school, that really important role of counseling and helping them really make a plan that fits what their goals are, their needs are, and understanding, frankly, the risks of some of the programs that they could enroll in.
So have either of you looked at the Georgia State Intensive Advising Model for increasing retention and completion rates?
I have not, but I will look into it.
Yeah, I don't know the Georgia State one. There was a coaching program. It's an organization based out in Oregon, but they've applied it in a couple of different community colleges. And Sarah Golder-Graub, who used to be here at Wisconsin, has done some work with them. Pretty tremendous success in terms of their ability to retain, especially men, in programs. The only thing I'll say about those programs is they're pretty expensive. So, we can always talk about trade-offs, but the cost per student per semester of that kind of intensive counseling, might cost more than what they're getting in Pell Aid. And so, would they be better off with another $5,000 in Pell Aid versus really intensive supportive? I mean, obviously both would be ideal. In an ideal world, we'd have no constraints and we'd give everyone everything, but we oftentimes don't have that choice. So these programs, I think, are really powerful. Whether they can be done at scale and whether they can be done in a way that is sort of sustainable, I think is a good question.
So there's another question, if there are any plans to break this data down state by state?
I think that's a question about the asset data, Funaba.
Yeah. Oh, that my
Sorry,
yeah.
couldn't find this reference point.
This one, yeah.
Oh, this one. Yeah, we need the data. That's the only, yeah, researchers were always limited by the availability and access to data. So this was a nationally representative data set. So the ability to do a state specific analysis was not possible. But we are working to try to get a larger data set that would allow us to do state by state. So look out for it in the future.
It's a general problem, I think, in both analyzing debt and wealth, is that we don't have great data. Most of the surveys that are out there are national, not state, or even less than state level. So it is hard data to get our hands on.
So at the end of this, there is a question. Research has shown that for African American and Latinx students, especially those that are first generation, that completing the first 2 years of higher education is extremely important for their future success. In addition to supporting the other costs incurred like room and board, etc. How do you see things transitioning for these students now that more colleges are moving to online classes and learning versus on-site campus-based participation? As we continue to live in this COVID-19 reality, do you see, and if so, what additional strains or assistance?
Thank you for the question. That's a great question. And I think that's something that all of us who are studying, not only just higher ed, but issues of financial insecurity are thinking about for our students and their families. I think, and there's so many different buckets that could be addressed with the scope of that question. I think think what we really want to be concerned with, I think some of the initial reports is that there's been a drop in the FAFSA applications for the fall and the spring. So the current mechanisms that are in place to assist families in getting some forms of aid are not being utilized, right? So that's concerning. That should be concerning for all of us. But also thinking about as we move online, as your question implies, you know, do our students have access to Wi-Fi and good Wi-Fi? Can they afford it if they're particularly economically vulnerable or coming from poor areas and poorer households? So, you know, COVID is going to raise a lot of questions that we need innovative, equitable solutions to navigate this. So, yeah, great question. Michael, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think it's a great question. We're in the middle of it, and so we don't know the answers. I think it's clear though that it's highlighting many of the challenges that we have on technology access, and that, you know, students from different backgrounds are at really different places in their ability to really, you know, be successful in this environment.
And I think this is the question all researchers want. Now, what data do you need from our institutions to be able to complete your research?
That's our favorite question.
How much are you willing to give us? I guess you want to start, Michael, or you want to start? I guess
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, you know, I am an inequality scholar, so it's really important to have demographic information tied to the rest of the data. You know, often the data is aggregated up to the institutional level, which makes it hard to tease out the inequalities, and it's necessary if we want to have targeted solutions to improve the populations that are really at most vulnerable. So I'll just, I mean, there's so much more I could say, but I'll also say demographics are helpful, and not just race, ethnicity, but first-gen status, disability status. You know, I could go on. Family structure, you know, so much stuff. So thank you. Yeah.
And I'll say we've worked with institutions that have been able to share data with us, but it's very, very rare to find. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to whether the general counsel is comfortable with sharing data and the data sharing protocols we have. And so I think a lot of institutions see it as too risky given FERPA and other regulations that are out there to share the data. So I think there's a lot we could do by linking, you know, everything from the transcripts to the application data to the FAFSA data to the, you know, there's all these things we can link together and really start to look at both trends within time in school and then refinancing, or sorry, the repayment and then refinancing of loans later, if we were able to create these data sets. But, you know, many institutions and, you know, ultimately many of the lawyers in these institutions are just too worried about the potential of running afoul of a regulation that's out there. So, you know, to the extent that there are regulatory relief that could allow some really carefully curated data set creation, I think it would be really valuable.
And I think this will be our final question at this point. And then I'd like to see if you have any final closing thoughts or remarks you'd like to leave us with based on any final summary or all the questions that have come. But is there any data on how being a first generation college student plays into all of this data on completion, debt, and race?
I think that my work hasn't explicitly examined that question, but I think that there is a growing literature that is starting to not only do that analysis, but sees the need for doing that type of analysis. What we need is either questions in the data set that ask about the parent's education or a linked intergenerational data set, which are out there, but are but we need to, you know, be a little bit more. We need to analyze it a bit more and continue to collect that data. Excuse me. Yeah.
I'll just underscore that point and say we have more first generation students enrolling in 2- and 4-year degrees than ever before. So this is a crucial area to try to understand.
So with that, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the task force members with in final summary of all the information you've provided and questions you've answered?
All right, I'll just say that, again, thank you for having me this morning. And as you move ahead and think about solutions and suggestions for the student loan environment, continue to have in the back of your mind, or maybe at the forefront of your discussions, will this proposed solutions perpetuate existing societal inequalities? And, you know, of course, you could pick and choose what societal inequalities you want to focus on or prioritize. But I think if we really want to see transformative change for the next cohort of college enrollees, then we really need to start thinking about how the solutions that we propose may disproportionately impact others, some rather than others. So thank you.
Yeah, I would echo Fenibus. Thanks for inviting us. Thanks for having us here. As I said, these are not easy questions. I think the most important thing I would take away from this conversation is that there's just a lot of heterogeneity, as we say in research. There's a lot of variation in both the schools that students attend, the age at which students enter, the demographic and racial background of students, the amount of debt, their use of loans. There's just so many different variations in students that it's probably not a one-size-fits-all solution, but trying to really focus in on these target populations that maybe are the most priority for the state to be thinking about would be a good place to start.
Well, the thanks certainly goes to both of you. So on behalf of the entire task force, thank you, Dr. Collins and Dr. Otto, for your time today and your expertise in sharing that information with us and leaving us with those questions. And at this point in time, with our gratitude to you, we are going to take a 10-minute break. So if everyone wants to stretch their legs and grab their cup of coffee or whatever beverage of choice they are having today, take a moment, and we'll be back at 12:05 to continue with our next presentation. Just give everyone a 2-minute warning before we reconvene our meeting. It's now 12:05. If we can have everyone come back together to continue with our meeting. Right, if we're able to continue with our meeting, I'd like to turn the microphone back over to Secretary Blumenfeld.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a minute or two to have a bio break, but I'm really delighted to introduce two of our very own task force members to be presenters this afternoon. So we have both the current president, Alford Chiamani, or Chiamani Alford, and the past president, Kevin McShane, of the Wisconsin Association of Financial Aid Administrators, or WAFSA, as we refer to them. And Connie mentioned them a few times this morning in her presentation as well. So I won't go into their bios since you have them all and they're posted on our website. But I will say and just emphasize the work that they do both in their current jobs as financial aid administrators, as well as the work that WAFSA does, is so critical and so helpful to students going through the process and helping them through. So we're very delighted to have them here today. And they'll be talking a little bit about what they do and how they serve students, as well as some recommendations for the task force. So thank you very much for your presentations today. I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Secretary Blumenfeld, for this opportunity, one, to be able to share this information with all of you, and then also to participate on this task force. I do want to say good afternoon to all of you. It's definitely a great day to be able to share and discuss important topics like student loan debt and what we can contribute from a financial aid lens toward this task force. So as mentioned, my name is Chiamani Alford. I am the current president of WASFA, the Wisconsin Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. And I am being joined by my esteemed colleague, Kevin McShane, and friend, who was also the past president of WASFA. WASFA is an association that represents over 400 financial aid administrators from over 70 colleges and universities in the state of Wisconsin. Also within the financial aid industry, we are ones that have to manage over 2,000 pages of regulatory guidance from the Department of Education, along with several regulatory compliance and laws from both the state and then also our own institutional dollars from private dollars and different things. So we have a huge task when it comes into getting aid in the hands of students to be able to support their cost of attendance while attending college to get their credential or their degree. So today, our focus is fairly straightforward. We're going to set the stage by sharing with you how affordability impacts students and some behavior students have adopted over the years in relation to student debt. Some of that information has been shared, but we want to continue to do that and build upon that. We'll also discuss the variations of institution types, share information on the components of an institution's cost of attendance, discuss some funding sources for students to cover those costs, and highlight some of the things institutions within the country are doing to reduce college costs. Of course, with an understanding that each institution cannot do the same things based on its type, its resources, and governing structure. And then we'll wrap it up with some recommendations on things or things that you can consider as we move forward. So when it comes into considering higher education overall, the one question that students, families, and college personnel is asking or are asking is, can you afford to attend? I've had several conversations with students and families sitting in our offices across the country and across the state and say, well, you're here, you decided to attend this institution or our institution, can you truly afford what it's going to take? If not, of course, there are resources to help support the costs that are associated with college. But federal student aid through the Department of Education provides more than $120 billion in grant, work study, and loan funds each year to help students pay for college or career school. Now, research indicates that 10% of colleges have enough money to minimize debt for middle and low income families. This means 90% of students and families do not often have the means, in a sense, to afford the various costs of higher education. And currently, 30 to 40% of college undergraduate students are borrowing student loans to cover the cost of attendance. And 70% of students who earn a bachelor's degree have education debt by the time that they graduate, according to the Urban Institute. Now, there is additional research that shares that although college costs have increased over the past 10 years or more, 79% of tuition increases are due to cuts in higher education funding, according to research done by Demos. Now, there are multiple contributors to why, but cuts in higher education are not only impactful on the institution, but also the student, as over 70% of full-time undergraduate students actually receive some form of grant aid to help pay for college. So you can see there that there's definitely a gap in being able to provide funding to students in order to help them pay for college. Now, of course, there are some disproportionate impacts when it comes into higher ed and loan debt. Some of our colleagues have shared that already, but over the years, the Department of Education has been criticized by researchers because there has not been enough research on the disproportionate impacts of student loan debt borrowing. Now, of course, one would attribute that the $1.5, $1.6 trillion in student loan debt to college costs, but that's not the true root of student loan borrowing. The truth is that it's hard to pinpoint a cause, a specific cause, because there just isn't enough research that provides a specific cause in that debt. Now, for example, the Brookings Institute did some research and shared that 4 years after graduation, Black graduates have nearly $25,000 more student loan debt than their white counterparts. That's $52,000 on average compared to $28,000 for the typical white graduate. Now, despite reductions in default rates, Black college graduates are still substantially more likely to default on their debt within 4 years of graduation, 7.6% versus 2.4% of white graduates. And nearly half of Black graduates, which is 48%, owe more on their federal undergraduate loans after 4 years than they did at graduation, compared to just 17% of their white graduate counterparts. Now, there's some additional information here that's going to help us dig a little bit deeper, because after the college student has went into loan repayment, so they've got their degree or dropped below half-time and went into loan repayment, we end up finding out, as far as through the research, that Black students held over 110% of their original balance, while Latinx students held 20 to 30% less in their original student debt after 12 years. Now, when we look at colleges and universities, of course, in America and within the United States, there are over 53 unique institutions that provide higher education to over 21 million students. Within Wisconsin, there are 132 institutions that are identified that provide higher education to students. So it just really hones in on as far as Wisconsin's population or contribution to the colleges and universities to be able to assist students. Now, when we think about those 5,300 institutions overall, there, of course, is a breakdown as far as when it comes into the various types. Now, identifying institution types provides, of course, a level of complexity, because even the ones that we have projected here can be further broken down into categories. But for the sake of time, we're going to focus on the public 2- and 4-year institution, which are educational institutions funded by a state government that leads to a specific college degree based on, as far as the institution type. So 2 years, associate's degree, 4 years, a bachelor's degree or higher. And then you have also the private nonprofit, which are those independent colleges and universities that's funded by private dollars and are governed by its own guidelines. So they're able to identify how the institution is to operate based off of that. And then, of course, proprietary, or those for-profit institutions, where the educational institution's goal is primarily to sell education and make money, but to also educate that student when it comes into the whole higher education spectrum. Now, it often leads into what I consider to be a really interesting question here. And that question is, does institution type matter when considering cost and student loan debt? And it really, really depends as far as the whole aspect of it, because one of the misconceptions is that the institution type or the cost of tuition is the contributor to unaffordability. That's not necessarily true when it comes into considering this, because there are multiple factors, such as the student and family financial preparedness and awareness. Are the parents and the students truly prepared when it comes into financial literacy, financial wellness as they enter into college, to truly understand what all goes into the college cost? Of course, the all available institutional support. Is there enough resources within the institution to be able to help support that student with those costs? And then, of course, the student really identifying or understanding if the program assessment, as far as what they desire to do within college, what are they planning to study? Is that investment worth, in a sense, attending that particular institution, and what are those needs of the student? And then also the difference as far as when it comes into tuition residency and the available state assistance that's available for those students. And then, of course, academic preparedness. When a student enters into college, are they truly academically prepared to handle the rigor of college? It reminds me of a situation where I had a dear friend of mine where she reached out to me, and her daughter wanted to attend college. Of course, they're a Wisconsin resident, but the daughter wants to attend a college that's in Philadelphia. And so it will make her a non-resident. And it caused her in this situation to need $20,000 more in resources that they technically didn't have. So we're looking at, as far as the institutional support was there, because academically she did well while attending high school, so she was able to get a partial scholarship, but the funding still did not allow her to cover all of those costs. So what ended up happening, or what is happening currently, is the parent is taking out PLUS loans in order to help support the cost of her daughter to attend that institution. And it's something, in a sense, that's held of high value to her and of great need. So the family is making those adjustments in a sense to be able to support the daughter in attending this institution. So it's some of those type of situations that are happening as we're having conversations with students when it comes into really determining if the college or if the student can afford attending that particular college. And that's some of the hard or tough conversations that we have to have when it comes with students and their parents. So when we think about this a little bit more here, and I've mentioned as far as the whole cost. So what is truly the cost? And I've tried to set that stage for you really to get you to understand higher education and what the contributors are as far as to drive, in the sense of student needing to borrow loans or needing additional resources in order to do that. But we want to switch gears here to really to share things about the cost of attendance, or what is often referred as the budget. So the cost of attendance, of course, is the cornerstone of identifying what is needed to attend that particular institution. Now, it goes off of the institution establishing most of the components based on as far as the geographic location of the institution, and it also may rely on industry figures like, say, the Consumer Price Index, which allows us to identify as far as what are the averages that people are paying within a particular area, or it could be surveys that are being done in a particular geographic location of that institution, or other means really to help estimate what those costs are for the student. Now, the Higher Education Act of 1965, Section 472, does provide the foundation as to what is to be included within the cost of attendance. And there is some flexibility and additional costs that can be added. For example, a student might need daycare expenses, or they might need to provide or get a computer, in a sense. I know that was something that was also mentioned. So all of that information can be, based off of the flexibility of the institution, added into the student's cost of attendance and could increase that student's cost of attendance. Now, what's going to end up happening a little bit later, my colleague Kevin is actually going to share as far as the impact of direct or indirect costs. But direct costs are paid directly to the institution, like tuition and fees. And while indirect costs are paid based on the student's needs and can vary from student to student. So every student, although the institution will have a general cost of attendance as far as what that sticker price is, per se, to attend that institution, the actual cost or the net price can vary from student to student, as every student doesn't necessarily need every component of that particular cost of attendance. And here is on this graph here, it just identifies as far as what those categories are. So you have tuition and fees, which are those costs charged to students based on the specific academic load. So depending on how many credits they are basically enrolled in, it's going to dictate the amount of tuition that they're paying. Some institutions will do a blanket once you're 12, say to 18 credits, it's the same amount of tuition that's charged. Some institutions will just charge you for each credit, then this is the amount that's associated with it. Books and supplies, of course, as far as those costs that of course materials, room and board, so those housing costs as far as what it takes actually to live are calculated and identified by institutions in order to clarify as far as what those costs are. Transportation, of course, as you have commuter campuses that students are going back and forth multiple times a week in order to attend that institution, that's factored into that cost of attendance. You have miscellaneous expenses, so things like personal needs while attending college, medical expenses, things of that nature are factored into miscellaneous costs. And then of course, loan fees are factored into it because there are, in a sense, a fee that's charged to the student from taking out loan fee, a federal student aid loan. And of course, there are various conversations that's on the table as far as to even eliminate loan fees, but that's definitely still factored into the cost of attendance. And then of course, other allowable expenses that are out there as far as for students to have added into those costs. So it gives you truly an idea of as far as what that cost of attendance is, specifically for students that attend. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Kevin, now, who's going to talk to us about as far as total cost versus net price.
Yeah, and I know we'll run short on time, so I'm going to go through some of this information quickly, but certainly hopefully offer the opportunity for people to ask questions as well, both during the call and after. So again, I think it's really important to understand both total costs and then the net price, as Kimani alluded to. So again, there's those direct costs and indirect costs, and some of that can vary by institution, whether or not you're living on campus or those are personal costs. So I'll kind of skip through this, but again, you can kind of see an example here where the direct cost of the school, in theory, for a commuter student could just be the tuition and fees, yet you would see an institution cost almost $19,000 a year to attend, depending what information you're looking at. So again, can vary greatly as far as direct costs and indirect costs. You could go to the next slide. So again, now when we start talking about net price, again, that's really the total cost that you've come up for that education minus the grant. So on the right, you'll see kind of an example of an award letter that the student might receive, and it kind of identifies what's going to be loans and then where there would be this gap. And we'll show that on a future slide. You can click to the next one. So this kind of gives a general sense. You know, we were obviously giving a sample example there of cost of attendance, but in 2017, 2018, showing the average net price for the different education sectors. So again, for sake of time, I won't go too much into this, but you can see how that varies by different institution type. And then again, remember that a lot of times that can be impacted by other sources of funding other than, you know, tuition revenue and you know, other items if somebody has public funding or private funding or other things that help supplement their operational costs. Okay, so here's a really good example to try to, you know, split out and show you what that looks like. This is our cost of it, our sample cost of attendance shows you what that looks like. On the right is the award letter. So if you really take your total costs minus just the gift aid, so it doesn't include the grants, you'll see that this student, to meet their full cost of attendance, would need an additional $7,500. They'll get about $5,300 of that through the federal loan program after fees. But again, remembering that those need to be repaid, and unsubsidized loans will collect interest while in school. And then again, this student would have about, you know, $2,200 worth of additional out-of-pocket costs if they truly needed everything of that cost of attendance to really be able to attend successfully. So that's where we start to talk about some of the gaps and challenges that people have, both with why do they maximize their loan debt and why do they, you know, sometimes not have enough funding to meet full need. That's what that could look like. Okay, and again, just for, you know, kind of clarification, again, in terms of this presentation, what we're talking about, gift aid is, you know, federal, state, private funding that does not have to be repaid. And again, typically these are referred to as grants and scholarships. And then self-help aid would be anything that, you know, you're ultimately responsible for at the end of the day. So think of loans, work study, you have to work for that money, or, you know, any out-of-pocket type expenses that students would be paying directly. We also wanted to provide some data in relation to how much money is in each program. Again, I think it's important to understand, you know, not only what types of programs are out there from the federal government and how much they spend, but it is important to, you know, to think about this in the context of how much money is out there. In addition, it is important to note that while the Pell Grant shows at $28.7 billion, and those often look like really large numbers, right now it's covering about 30% of a cost of a four-year public school education. And that's if you're fully eligible for the Pell Grant. And again, this is really the lowest proportion in history and less than half of what it was in 1980. So when we talk about how proportionate that is, you know, that's something to keep in the back of your mind in relation to these dollars. So while they're large amounts of dollars, obviously the landscape has changed significantly over that 40-year period. It's also, I think, important for obviously this task force, as we're focusing on, you know, first and foremost, the students of Wisconsin, is to understand that distribution and how that works. Because I know we've had a lot of discussions today on institution type. It's important to understand kind of, you know, in this illustration, looking at Pell Grant dollars, how much is going to each institution type. You'll see that the vast majority of money goes to public institutions, with the private four-year receiving about 21%. of the total Pell Grant amount, and proprietary schools in the state of Wisconsin making up just over 2% of Pell Grant, the total Pell Grant receipts in the state of Wisconsin. If we take a look at the next slide, this is really a different way to show the same amount of the same information. So the same data set for 2017, 2018 Pell Grant, and just kind of showing you how that's distributed in a different chart. And it really kind of show you, how that's split out. But for sake of time, we'll kind of buzz past that and ask, again, answer additional questions that people have at the end. So I think for one of the other things that we wanted to touch on today was really talking about the ways that schools are also looking to reduce costs, right? Obviously, there's a large discussion in the cost of college. What are the direct costs? And again, a lot of times those national discussions are occurring around the cost of attendance, which has direct and indirect costs. Colleges mainly can control those direct costs to the university where the university is receiving that funding. So there are a number of things that schools are looking at to try to reduce costs as well. One is really this transparency and education quality, and I think that's been talked about in a little bit different context today. But colleges are really working to equate value to their costs, right? So students understand the quality of the education they'll get for the price, what outcomes they can expect, and that way the student can really place a personal ROI on, a return on investment on what will this education get me if I select this institution. So schools are really working hard on that transparency of quality and services offered. The second one is maximizing technology, everything from electronic textbooks to, online offerings, open course formats online, technology investments to aid in the administration of higher education. So again, using different technological means to replace higher costs that come elsewhere. Those are consistently being looked at by schools. And then financial education, continually more and more, representing WASPA and all the different institutions across the state. Every institution is working to find ways to increase the financial education of their students so that students understand, one, what they need to save for before they go to college, two, what does that mean while they're in school, and then three, what does that mean from a repayment perspective at the end. I'll turn it over to Kimani here again for a few comments.
Yeah, so there are definitely a part of the whole aspect of financial education and being able to contribute that. We know as financial aid administrators that specifically a large population or all of our students in the sense that receive student loans, we are basically, I would say, restricted from providing additional requirements to students who basically receive loans. The Department of Education does not allow us to add additional requirements for a student that we might feel could benefit from additional financial education. So we provide that information to them, but we can't require it. And I think that's important to highlight, especially when we're looking at the disparities when it comes into various populations that's receiving loans and not necessarily completing. But even in the aspect of being able to reduce costs, you have the big conversation when it comes into tuition, and tuition is just too high. But there are many institutions that's doing things in a sense to reduce the cost of their tuition. Of course, tuition freezes, aspects of it, tuition discounting aspects of it, and then even things like reciprocity programs that's allowing students to come in from other areas that normally would have been charged a non-resident type of tuition, but getting a particular discount for attending that particular institution. And then you have things as far as assessments of the organizational structure, because right now in the financial aid or even in higher education industry, institutions are forced to do more with less. So we have to be creative in a sense in the ways. So we provide our services to students, provide our support to students. And so many institutions are looking at ways in a sense to do that. But we also know on the outside of it, when you basically combine various things that goes on within an institution or the support structure, you can also minimize the impact for students. So that's definitely some of the things that are looked at when it comes into reducing some of those costs.
And a few other, quick comments. There's things that all institutions are doing, like, encouraging community college attendance or technical college attendance. A lot of schools have articulation agreements. So again, if the student isn't in a financial position to attend the college that they ideally would want to, but want to earn credit and then transfer into that institution, there's a lot of situations like that. And again, a lot of schools are working cross-functionally to look at those opportunities. And then another one is dual enrollment, right? Whether it's in high school taking college credit or in an associate degree and earning credits that count towards associate and bachelor, or even in some cases bachelor credits that count towards master's degrees. These dual enrollment type concepts can save students money as well, from an overall cost perspective, which can be very valuable.
Yeah, you also have, in a sense, various states that's adopting the Promise program or the free tuition type of concept, where right now there are over 200 Promise programs across the country, and there are 16 states specifically that has, in a sense, launched Promise programs, where the state like California is one that has a statewide Promise program that awards a Cal grant up to $12,000 to help students, in a sense, pay for those costs and reducing those costs of higher education. You then also have the focus on textbooks and the cost of textbooks, where many institutions are launching what we consider to be textbook rental programs that are reducing the cost of thousands of dollars in some cases of textbooks down to just hundreds of dollars as they get their education. So many institutions are reviewing that information. And I know even at the institution that I'm at, we've been able to look at the cost of textbooks and allow students to get that textbook for $7 per credit, compared to being hundreds of dollars when it comes into as far as getting their textbooks overall. Then, of course, you have things as far as when you consider, considering everything that's going on in financial aid and within higher education, what are some of those recommendations that truly are out there that could help support some of the work that we have? Of course, this isn't an all-encompassing list, but I think it's definitely some that we can call out in the sense that would be supportive. One is the whole high school student, and basically making sure that once they leave high school, or contributing to once they leave high school, that they have the financial literacy to understand what's going to happen when you're in college. Yes, financial aid administrators are performing high school nights and various workshops for high schools, but in the mantra, or in the sense, the umbrella of having to do more with less, being able to specifically mandate a financial literacy course that's within the high school can definitely contribute to educating the student that as they enter into high school, into college, that they are aware of the various stages of basically affording college. And then, of course, attaching some form of recognition to that by offering a financial literacy scholarship for those that participate in that particular program, which also helps to reduce loan debt, because students, in a sense, will be getting additional gift aid that will help to pay down some of those costs or address some of the costs that they might have. And then, of course, as I just mentioned on the previous slide, as far as the whole aspect of Promise programs, Wisconsin does not have a Promise program statewide, but that's definitely one that institutions across the state are launching or have launched through private dollars, and raising that funding in the sense to help support those students. And what we're finding out is that students that are enrolled or participants of the Promise programs, they're not borrowing student loans. I can probably have several conversations with all of you about our Promise program, even at the institution that I'm at, as far as the outcome of those students really saying, I do not want to borrow loans, and I don't plan on borrowing loans. And that's based off of the support that they're receiving from those particular Promise programs.
And I'll quickly go over a couple additional ideas. There's a lot of research out there, and we probably can talk about this at a later date, but emergency or completion grant programs, programs geared, there's a lot of students and research that'll show that many students withdraw from school over financial emergencies of less than $500. So talking about ways that we can get students to stay, to help with retention and to help with completion, those are critical as we've discussed today. We certainly can talk more details at a later date. We also have, discussed the idea of a kind of like a partnership loan reimbursement program. And I think people have talked about this, and we'll have to save details for another day, but the idea that private industry, the state government, and the student could enter into some type of agreement to keep the students, our educated populace here in the state of Wisconsin, give them opportunities to be gainfully employed, and then turn around and have that opportunity that's tied to their loan repayment, or that there is some incentive for them to be in the state and to be able to repay that loan debt that at times can be difficult to repay. Again, a lot of details would need to go into a program like that, but that's something we believe should be considered. And then lastly, really thinking about a loan debt repayment advocacy program, whether that be through like an ombudsman's office or having a team or an agency that assists students. There's a lot of private companies and individual schools now that are working hard to try to connect students to understand what their options are when they leave school and are in repayment. I think we've already heard through this task force, and we hear it on a daily basis in financial aid offices, that students don't fully understand their loans up front, and they certainly don't understand the complexities of the 8 different federal loan repayment programs at the end of their time in school. So again, we can talk more detail at a later date again, like I said, but the idea of having some state influence and a resource available for students so that they end up in the best situation possible. So just in conclusion, I think there's really, a couple of key themes here that you'll see. One is literacy, saving, and understanding before you go to school. Access and support to help you while you're in school, and then, employment and, post-attendance literacy as well, so people can get to the point where they're in, full repayment of their student loans. So those are kind of the concepts that we'd like everybody to consider as part of this task force.
Thank you both very much for sharing all of that information with the task force. And there were a few questions that came in near the end that we will have you follow up with in relation to the e-binder, as well as both of you are on the task force, so we can continue receiving information from you and continuing this conversation, as there are some ideas and concepts in these questions that I'm sure will continue this conversation. And so in the interest of our debt borrowers, will be proceeding to receiving their information before we conclude our meeting today.
Great, thank you both. What a great presentation and great recommendations as well. So appreciate it. I'm going to take the liberty of introducing both folks just in the interest of time, so that Marisha, you can go right to Stephanie, you can go follow right after Marisha. But Marisha Harris is the lead community relations analyst for Goodwill Industries of Southeastern Wisconsin and Metropolitan Chicago. She has a heart for the community. She actively gives her time. Marisha is an active supporter of several nonprofit organizations, including serving as United Way Emerging Leaders Council member and as an adult achiever for the YMCA. Marisha is a Milwaukee native and has earned her Master's of Arts and Bachelor's of Arts from Alverno College. So thank you, Marisha, for joining us today, as well as Stephanie Munoz, who is a Project and Community Engagement Associate with the Race to Equity Project of Kids Forward and Community Scholars Program Coordinator at Edgewood College. Stephanie is a first-generation graduate of Edgewood College and UW-Madison. Stephanie borrowed to attend Edgewood and then again at UW-Madison, where she received her master's degree in social work. So thank you both for being here today and sharing your stories and really making all of this real for us. We appreciate it so much. So Marisha, if you want to start off.
All right. Thank you very much, Secretary Blumenfeld. I am so grateful for the opportunity to be here with all of you today and to serve on the task force. I have to admit that this is a very vulnerable moment for me, perhaps one of the most vulnerable moments I've had in my life, but I truly know firsthand the magnitude of the issue that we are tasked with addressing right now. And so I completely embrace this vulnerability. This topic is very, very personal for me. It's very real and it's actually very recent for me. I am a proud Milwaukee native. I'm also a proud product of public education. I graduated from Milwaukee Public Schools, and I wholeheartedly believe that education is a great equalizer. And that is a belief that I hold true because of my personal lived experiences. In my formative years, I watched my father overcome his addiction to alcohol and drugs and earn his accounting degree from Milwaukee Area Technical College. And it was when he earned his education that my family moved from some of the worst, most dangerous neighborhoods in our city to a neighborhood that was safe where my brothers and I could finally go outside and play. And so those are the experiences that shaped me as a child. And so when I graduated from Riverside University High School, I knew I was going to college. And I knew that getting my education was going to change the trajectory of my life. But in order for me to make my dreams an aspiration, I took out federal and private student loans to attend Alverno College. While I was in school, I became a mother. I had my daughter after my second year of school, and she was born 6 weeks premature. And then when I graduated, I was actually pregnant with my son and on bed rest because he too was trying to come before his due date. So if you were to see pictures of me at my graduation, I was in a wheelchair, I had to be pushed around. And about 2 weeks after I graduated, he was born, and he was 10 weeks premature. So I was taking care of my infant, and I also had to care for my daughter, of course. And so I was unable to enter the traditional workforce right away. I consulted, and that allowed me to earn some income while also being able to take care of my children, particularly my son, who at the time had some health challenges due to his prematurity. And it also allowed me to gain some work experience. But despite the fact that I was still trying to prioritize work while also caring for my children, my student loan debt holders were not satisfied. And they were very difficult to work with, refusing to work with me at times. And so after many years of going back and forth with them, I was finally able to start making some more affordable payments. But then I hit another very difficult period of time in my life. I was going through a divorce. And I remember having to go downtown to file for a restraining order. And in the midst of all of that, all of impacts of divorce, the financial impacts, the emotional impacts, I missed 2 student loan payments, 2 $25 student loan payments. And that's a mistake that taught me a very, very hard lesson. Consequences of that mistake lasted for years. I went from paying $25 on 2 student loans, so $50 a month, to having to pay significantly more on my student loans. So for example, this January alone, I had to pay more than $1,000 on my student loan debt. That doesn't include, my car note, any other expenses, the kids' expenses, just my student loan debt. So January, I'm excited to share, was the last of those extremely high student loan payments. It was closure to a very difficult chapter in my life. During that time, during that chapter, I had to make some very difficult decisions. For example, I had to choose between whether or not I would keep my car or move from my home. And because having a car is required for me to sustain my gainful employment, I chose to move with my children. Just a little details to kind of paint a better picture of the backdrop with regard to my story. The 6-month grace period on the student loans went so quickly, like a blink of the eye. And during that time, again, I was caring for 2 children who had been born too soon, and both needed medical care. I remember both my children needed a shot between October and throughout the winter months. And that shot was for each child $3,000 out of my pocket. And I remember telling my student loan holders my situation and getting the response, "I don't want to hear your sad, sappy story." And those are words that I'll never forget. My mother, let me backstep a little bit. After I missed the payments, I tried diligently to work with my student loan holders, but they refused to work with me without getting financial disclosure over the phone from my mother, who had health and mobility issues and had co-signed on my loan. They were very difficult, not willing to work with her. She sent them a $350 check and a letter with a payment arrangement outlined in that letter. They mailed the check back to my mom and took us to court. And so I can't begin to even express the gratitude that I have that this task force exists to really look at all of the complexities as it relates to student loan debt. One of my wishes for our task force is to look at debt collection practices, particularly those around private student loans. So again, I want to thank you all for listening to my story, and I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you so much for your story. Stephanie?
Buenos dias. My name is Stephanie Munoz. As I was introduced today, I work for the Race to Equity Project. It's a project of Kids Forward, previously the Wisconsin Council on Children and Families. And in the last year here, I also started working very part-time supporting college students as part of a scholarship program at Edgewood College. So I want to thank you guys today for taking the time to hear me. Thank you so much, Marisha, for sharing your story and your perspective. My perspective and my story is a little different. So as you heard, I am a first generation student. My mom had me when she was very young. I'd come from an immigrant family, and education was something that was highly, highly valued in my community, culturally, in my family. And so I always knew that higher education was the goal and was going to be that thing that would transform my life and the life of those in my family. What that really meant was what we didn't know. My mom, as I said, had me when she was very young. And she did complete high school in a non-traditional form, and always did what she could to make sure that we were living in a place where I had access to a great school district, and kind of did what she could to get me on the path of higher education. I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and we moved to Madison, Wisconsin, chasing that dream and that opportunity. My mom always felt as though Los Angeles didn't have opportunity, and met a colleague who was from Madison who shared that it was a great place to raise a family and that the colleges here were great. So without knowing anything, we picked up and we moved when I was a freshman in high school. I also had two younger siblings that were considered in that decision. So fast forward and to my senior year, where by mere happenstance, while sitting in the counselor's office for probably one of my final check-ins, I saw a small 8x11 poster that was tacked on the board that was talking about a scholarship opportunity at Edgewood College, which was a small private college that I had visited and had liked, but knew that it was a small private college and was very expensive, so hadn't applied or even considered it. And I asked, like, hey, what's this? And my guidance counselor actually had zero idea about the program. And so she followed me out and pulled off the piece of paper, and we read it together and went on the website in her office. And we kicked off the process. I applied to Edgewood College. I was accepted. I applied for the scholarship. I was awarded the scholarship, which was a full tuition scholarship that covered tuition, books, and supplies. At the time, Edgewood College had a requirement that freshman students live on campus, and it was challenging for students to get a waiver to not live on campus. We knew that we couldn't afford for me to live on campus, and so my mom went to the school to submit the paperwork. And I wasn't there, but she had some type of interaction in which she was, I don't know if they were trying to convince her that I should live on campus or what happened, but she walked away deciding that the best decision for me was to live on campus and that it was not a good decision for me to live at home, which is what we had planned. So luckily I was eligible for additional aid on top of my full tuition scholarship, but the only aid that I was eligible for was loans. Not knowing much about the system and what that meant and the longstanding impact of student loan debt, we went ahead and we accepted what we were awarded. And I utilized that to live on campus. Fast forward to then graduate school and not really knowing what the next steps were for me. But no, I was in the field of social work and similar to prior, kind of heard talks about the essential need for a master's degree in my field in order to succeed in my career. And so kind of just went with the flow. Found very limited options for financial aid support for graduate school. And so again, just borrowed what I was eligible for to pay for school and for my living expenses as I met the requirements of the program, because there was a requirement for essentially a full-time internship, which didn't leave space for lots of time for employment, given that I was working in a social work capacity, so like a 9 to 5. Now, fast forward to my time as a graduate. Luckily, I have been able to find employment that is fulfilling for me and that allows me a decent income. But having the looming debt has been something that has definitely impacted my life in many ways. It has affected my decisions with my partner around how we form our life and how the decisions that we make as a family, purchasing a home, choosing to have children, where we live. And so I think that has been a major impact. And then similar to Marisha, just the challenges of navigating the system. So I actually have a little bit of insight because in my undergraduate, I worked in the financial aid office. And so I knew a little bit, but navigating the process and the paperwork, I've been able to stay as much as I can up to date, but there have been random happenings that have occurred. And so one great example is late last year, I had a bill that was 5 times the amount of my repayment. I'm on the income-based repayment. And I called immediately to ask what had happened. And apparently, according to them, they had attempted to contact me about some paperwork that I was supposed to submit that didn't get submitted. However, I have electronic notifications and I went into the system and I thought that I had updated. And so there was just seemingly very little notice about the fact that now I no longer qualified for that payment, but it turns out that I did. And so just the complications of navigating that world. So for me, I think when I think about pieces that elements that would have been helpful, I think for me, it is rooted in financial literacy that incorporates family. We live in a culture that is very individualistic when that's not the reality of all of our students entering our systems. The reality for me was that I was making these decisions with my family and I was leaning on their lack of understanding. I think the system as it is structured currently relies on this generational understanding of these systems and how to navigate them and what they mean. And I didn't have that. Then moving into a system at Edgewood where even though I came in as this scholar with support, it was still, the onus was on, we expect 17, 18-year-olds to understand the implications of the papers that they're signing and the decisions that they're making with very little guidance on what that looks like and what options truly are. So I think for me and then even being brought on as a scholar with a scholarship, the implications of that, of having to be a leader on campus, and to some degree having to be the one to out yourself and to come to the adults in this structure and be vulnerable at such a young age and say, I don't know what I'm doing. My family doesn't know what they're doing. Can you help me? When you have this title of like this scholar and this leader on campus, was something that was really challenging to navigate, and I think landed me in making some of the decisions that I made. And then I think the second piece for me it was interesting to hear, I hopped on a little early and was able to hear some of the recommendations, some type of link between local institutions and the federal process, because navigating the phone calls and the many systems, I have like 3 different logins and you have one password here and one thing there, and not having a real person that or a local person that understands the implications of, okay, this is where we're at and this is the relationship between X system or X employer and the federal system, I think would be something that would be tremendously helpful if there was some way that there was somewhere to go. And I think lastly for me would be that some type of continued financial education, financial literacy, or loan support was the responsibility of employers. So I think about public service loan forgiveness. And again, being the person that needs to out themselves in the workplace as someone who needs a service and having to collect all of the paperwork and provide it to an employer. For an employer, I've had employers that have gotten frustrated and have been like, we did this paperwork already, or this never goes through. And those applications being denied, and that being the onus of the employee rather than a benefit of the workplace. So some type of pre-qualification of organizations, if their employees qualify for particular repayment options, that the employer does as part of their benefits package or introduction to the workplace, I think are some things that for me would have been tremendously helpful as I've navigated this world.
Thank you so much, Stephanie and Marisha, for trusting us with your stories and your experiences and providing us with your thoughts and recommendations for us as we move forward with the mission of the task force. We really appreciate your time and sharing that information with us today. I'm sure if there are any follow-up questions that task force members have, we'll gather those and touch base with you if there's anything that members would like to expand upon with relation to your story, and if you're willing to share that information. So thank you again very much for your time and trusting us with that information. So as it relates to our next meeting and the task force and where we're going from here, next week, June 3rd, we will be meeting from 10 to 1 again via WebEx, our virtual meeting. And just want to reinforce how we want to hear from the task force members. It's really important that we receive your thoughts, information, and feedback. So we will be sending out a survey asking what went well, what could we do better in our virtual meeting world, as well as asking some additional follow-up questions as it relates to ideas and speakers and borrowers that you may want to hear from, so we can be gathering that outside of our meeting space, our regular meetings. Remember to also check the lookforwardwisconsin.gov Student Debt Task Force website. There we will post the recording. About 48 hours after the meeting is our goal, based on how the recording renders in that time period. A reminder that we'll work to send the reading materials and follow-up question responses that we have to you about 48 hours before the meeting. We will be sending an email, as we did today, about an hour before meeting start times with the PowerPoints. So if you're participating by phone, you can look for that email day of meeting to get those PowerPoints to follow along in that regards. And then any follow-up emails that we have to send post-meeting, task force meetings, those will come about 48 hours after our meeting time as well. So we're in that 48-hour window to just 1 hour before. Also, the presentations will post to this website that we have here just before the meeting start time. So if you don't have access to your email, but you do have access to the website, you could find the presentations there day of, just before meeting start time as well. Any feedback that you have on today's meeting, or any concerns, questions that are logistical in nature, please reach out to me at michelle.reinen@wisconsin.gov, and we'll work to take care of those and work to incorporate any ideas for the meeting into future. And again, our future meetings will involve more interaction. Appreciate your use of the chat space to interact with one another. We will be incorporating activities and pollings and prioritizations into our future meetings and agendas, and having time for that, because we want to be sure that our task force members can interact, exchange ideas and information. This is for you to come up with those recommendations, and I will just help facilitate that. So with that being said, I'll turn the microphone back over to the secretary for final words and adjournment.
Thank you to all the presenters and all the participants. We really appreciate it. Again, our meeting cadence will be meeting again next week, and then we'll have a break for 3 weeks. So I'll have some time to do some more self-study in between that time. But really just grateful to everyone for their participation, for sharing their stories, sharing their recommendations, and look forward to connecting with you all next week. Take care and be well. Thank you. Bye-bye.